Chapter 761. The Great President of the Federation, entrusted with the responsibility of managing 3 large regions, nearly 10 administrative systems, and the tens of billions of citizens on hundreds of mineral planets, the highest authority to command millions of federal forces, was frightened into hiding by 2 simple videos into a hidden base in the belly of Siming Mountain. For the government officials in the conference room, the National Security Advisor's suggestion was without a doubt a resounding slap to their faces. However, none of them could object to this suggestion, even though they felt incredibly humiliated in their hearts. Because when they saw those black MX mechas on the screen charging out of the darkness like ghosts without anyone controlling them and smashing into the armored vehicles, they felt an unprecedented shock and fear. As people of the Federation who had been bathed in the glory of the Charter since childhood, they could not understand the strange authority relationship between the central mainframe and Sulu. They did not even know the operating procedures of the central mainframe, but they knew very well how the Federation relied on the Charter network. Now, what they relied on the most seemed to have become the most powerful weapon of the enemy. So how could they not feel uneasy? President Pabre looked at the last shot on the screen and frowned slightly. He shook his head and rejected this suggestion. Raising a hand to stop the cabinet member's anxious advice, he said in a low voice, "I'm the president of the Federation. If I hide out of fear, do you think I will have to hide for the entire term?" He slowly swept a glance around the conference room and said in an unquestionable tone, "The matter regarding Colonel Sulu must be kept strictly confidential. It is strictly forbidden to spread outside of this conference room. The government must immediately set up a specialized department to deal with this unexpected situation. General Lee J. will be fully in charge. Breen will be your liaison officer." Sitting in the corner behind President Pabre, the director of the office, Breen, nodded in greeting to the crowd. The president continued to issue orders. Although he had not slept for the entire night, his voice was still as deep and powerful. His calm and deep tone gave off a sense of calmness. Work will be split into 2 directions. First, the relevant departments will immediately carry out a bounty operation and strive to find or kill this person in the shortest amount of time. At this stage of the discussion, the word "kill" finally appeared on the screen of the workbench in the president's residence. This was because everyone in the meeting room knew very well how dangerous the Federation hero who had escaped was. Secondly, the Bureau of Proclamation must find a way to remove Su Lee's first sequence authority as soon as possible. We cannot allow the Federation's the glory of the Charter to become a sanctuary for criminals. The acting director of the Bureau of Proclamation, Chui Jadong, was sitting on the right side of the president. After hearing the order, he shook his head and said in a low voice, "Mr. President, I'm very sorry. The sequence authority is in the core program. The Bureau of Proclamation can't get the central computer to remove this authority. In fact, we've been working hard for many days, but we haven't gotten any results." This was truly terrible news. What was worse was that everyone could see the exhaustion and despair hidden in the depths of the director of the Bureau of Proclamation. They couldn't help but become nervous and silent. General Lee J. who had asked the Bureau of Proclamation at the very beginning, suddenly said calmly, "Regarding the issue of Su Lee's authority, I think that if the central computer can't remove his authority on its own accord, perhaps we should find a way to force the central computer to take back the authority passively." "What way?" Chui Jadong looked at Lee J. in confusion. He thought of what the other party had said on the street one day, and a faint hope grew in his heart. Although it was not much, it was still there. Conflicting program logic. Lee J. looked at the crack in a road on the screen of light and said with a frown, "This matter has just taken shape, but before we have concrete evidence, even I am not confident that it can be done." He raised his head to look at President Pabre and said, "We need some time. During this time, we must give Sulu enough pressure." The new director of the Federation Bureau of Investigation interrupted and said, "Regarding the first item, the Bureau of Investigation of the Federation has already issued a red warrant. Please rest assured, Mr. President and everyone else. The 3-level surveillance network of the Federation, Even if the highest level cannot be activated, the Bureau of Investigation and the Ministry of Defense still have two levels of surveillance networks. Not only can we give Su Lu enough pressure, I am confident that we can directly capture or kill him. Chui Zedong, who was not very energetic and had a tired expression between his eyebrows, looked at him mockingly and refuted. As long as this strange first sequence authority exists and the central computer continues to help him, then all the automatic surveillance of the Federation will become meaningless. Data and information. You may not understand, but all data and information are under the surveillance of the central computer. Capture or kill him. I don't think that can be done by relying on the paralyzed two-level surveillance network. The director of the Federation Bureau of Investigation was silent and speechless. Somewhat angrily, he roughly combed his gray hair with his fingers. President Pabre's expression was as calm as usual. He looked at Director Chui Zedong and reminded him lightly, "Don't forget, the Federation has tens of billions of people. The central computer cannot control people. So for this operation, we must rely on, and can only rely on, the power of people." He closed his eyes. It was unknown what he was thinking about. Then he opened his eyes and said in a self-deprecating tone, "A federal officer, a fugitive, can actually cause the entire federal government to feel fear and unease. I have to admit that the Federation has reached its most dangerous time. Is this absurd? No, not at all. Because we all know how dangerous the person we are about to face is. I announce that the Federation has entered a secret two-level alert state." President Pabre looked at the people in the conference room and said after a moment of silence, "Everyone, this is a war. This is a war between the Federation and one person. We must win the final victory." Returning to the surface from underground, the presidential residence in the early morning was shrouded in a pale golden light. The dew on the lawn sparkled like a layer of fibrous mattress. The noise of the previous night had long disappeared with the withdrawal of the troops. Only the Special Task Force agents, who had raised their security to the highest level, were in their respective corners looking around like eagles in the woods. President Pabre sternly refused any overly tense request from the security department. He stood side by side with Li Jiedu on the balcony, looking at the beautiful morning scenery in front of him. His expression was not as calm and confident as it was in the conference room. "I know Su Li's personality very well, just like I know my own," President Pabre said in a low voice. "Because of that damned authority, once he makes up his mind, he will definitely become the most terrifying enemy. But you can't stop investigating those things because of fear. Whether or not to anger him is all in your consideration. But I think that before we catch him or kill him, it's best that his team members stay alive." "I think so too," Li Jiedu said with emotion. "A young officer caught in a conflict of ideas is always easier to deal with than a killer driven mad by anger. It's a new day." President Pabre looked at the lawn below the balcony and said with a smile, "There are new challenges and new problems waiting for us to deal with. But this time, the problem seems to be more troublesome." Li Jiedu said, "I've never mentioned a certain conjecture because I originally thought that this matter could be properly dealt with, so this conjecture would be meaningless. But now, it seems that in order to deal with the most troublesome part, I really do need to wait for that result." After a pause, he continued, "If it doesn't work, then transfer back to Lifeng." Su Lu escaped, and the Federation government began to pursue or kill him. The important figures had many things to deal with, such as how to face the inquiries from the families, how to resolve the shock, confusion, and even strong dissatisfaction and anger of the Federation people, how to answer the people's questions, and how to ensure that the government and military could unswervingly carry out the will of the president. That morning, the building of the Ministry of National Defense was the first to welcome the government's action. It had to be said that this choice of order was very correct. However, the Ministry of National Defense officers who did not know the inside story could not hide their shock when they saw the minister organizing documents in the minister's office. The Minister of National Defense, Zhou Yingxing, was asked by the president to temporarily leave his post and accept a certain investigation mission. The government did not state the reason for his temporary leave, but Minister Zhou Yingxing himself knew very well. Looking at the lush plant by the window, Minister Zhou's lips curled into a bitter smile. He basically did not sleep last night. Although the secret military operation at Charter Square directly bypassed the Ministry of National Defense, as the Minister of National Defense, how could he not notice it? Until now, most people in the Capitol Ring still believe that Su Lu was his prospective son-in-law. But this word had been delayed for 4 or 5 years. When this war between the Federation and one person began, because of this relationship, although the Minister of National Defense had a high position and the influence of Mo Cho Ingxing behind him, the president's office had to force him to leave this position at all costs. Of course, the government could not directly remove him, so they used the excuse of temporary leave. "Mr. Minister, do you want to bring this plant home?" "No, I have to come back," Minister Zhou said calmly. He was born in the military logistics system and was known for his low profile, but he had been the Minister of National Defense for almost 5 years. Of course, he had considerable strength in the army. In the face of the so-called temporary leave, he could have made a stronger response, even a response that would make the president's office feel very troubled. But he chose to leave peacefully. Zhou Ingxing narrowed his eyes as he walked out of the minister's office and greeted the shocked and confused officers with a smile. However, he felt a chill in his heart. The front line was still fighting, and the war with the Empire was still ongoing. How could the Federal Army be in chaos? It seemed that the things Su Lu found were all true, and the president, who was good at grasping people's hearts, had already determined that he could only accept everything calmly in order to maintain the unity of the army. Chapter 762. The Federation's political reporters often mocked themselves for having a pig's sense of smell and a dog's sense of propriety. They knew very well what kind of reports could pass the review of the editorial department and the higher-ups in the political atmosphere at different times, and what kind of reports, no matter how exciting and eye-catching they were, could only end up as garbage data fragments in the workbench circuit. Based on these two characteristics, they had no reason not to notice the unusual situation in the capital last night. The field forces stationed in the suburbs had actually moved into Charter Square. It was said that it was a drill, but who would believe it? Then, through their own information channels, they obtained more sensational information. For example, the Federation government and Parliament Hill security level had increased again, and it was said that the Federation Investigation Bureau was launching a secret manhunt targeting the hero of the Federation who had just returned from the Westwoods and had not been successfully intercepted by the reporters. All the reporters were flustered, excited, perplexed, and impulsive. They did not know if these things could be pursued or not, and what kind of shocking news would be released if they pursued them. However, after a short period of mental struggle, they still put on their windbreakers and rushed out of the doors of the major newspapers and television stations, rushing towards their own destinations. The reporters in a news event were like soldiers on the battlefield. If they smelled something but did not continue to investigate, it was equivalent to soldiers who raised their hands and surrendered without firing. No matter what the final result of this battle was, no reporter could forgive themselves for not raising their guns at that time. Then, the reporters found that they had run into countless cold iron plates. No matter what kind of good relationship they had, the various departments of the federal government had closed their doors to them today, and no one was willing to accept their interview. The Ministry of National Defense building was heavily guarded, and armed military police were guarding the door, forbidding anyone without a pass to enter. Even the Venus reporters with military backgrounds were not allowed to enter. The reporters anxiously shouted the name of the spokesperson of the Ministry of National Defense outside the cordon, and loudly asked if the news of Minister Zhou's temporary resignation was true. Only dead silence answered them, and the officers in the building looked at them with complicated expressions. No one from the management office of Charter Square accepted the interview. The members of Parliament who were in a hurry on Parliament Hill were collectively silent. The president's official residence even announced at the last minute that the routine briefing that was supposed to be held at 10 o'clock in the morning would be suspended for a day. The reporters, who had already pinned all their hopes on the press briefing at the official residence, made extremely dissatisfied noises. It seemed like a chaotic market, but in fact, they were cooperating very tacitly and continuously putting pressure on the press spokesperson. After the chaos lasted for a few minutes, the spokesperson of the president's official residence whispered to Director Breen in the side corridor. He then walked back to the stage and looked at the reporters who were looking forward to it. He gave a very stingy explanation. The explanation was very simple, but it was quite unexpected. It also gave the reporters of the Federation a lot of rich and exciting imaginations. Mr. President had a bad cold and needed a rest, so the press briefing was temporarily suspended. The reporters on the scene were collectively silent. They lowered their heads and quickly recorded the statement of the spokesperson on the light screen on the workbench. At the same time, they frowned and sketched out all kinds of possibilities with digital pens. The reporters knew that they couldn't get any more information from the president's official residence. They got up and rushed to the next government department that might be captured. This kind of action continued until the evening. The reporters took turns to fight between the various buildings in the Capital Special District and finally succeeded in blocking the deputy minister in front of the Ministry of Justice building. According to the latest information they had, the president's official residence had authorized the deputy minister to give a brief explanation to the major media about everything that happened last night until this morning. Yesterday at 21:40, in response to the terrorist incident on Parliament Hill a few days ago, the federal military successfully conducted an anti-terrorism exercise codenamed Late Spring in the area around Charter Square. Through this exercise, the various departments of the Federation government strengthened the information exchange and matching between each other. In order to face similar terrorist attacks again, they practiced relevant plans and gained a lot of valuable experience. Why did the news of a military exercise need to be announced by the Ministry of Justice? The reporters were keenly aware of this. They realized that the government would probably relent today, so they continued to ask without hesitation, "Mr. Minister, we just want to know, is the Federation government looking for Colonel Sulu? In addition, has Minister Zhou Yingxing been asked to resign from the Ministry of Defense?" Let me first correct one point. Minister Zhou didn't resign. He only went to the Federation's strategic equipment base for inspection at the special request of Mr. President. Because of the upcoming war in the Empire's mainland, the Federation's strategic equipment is facing a difficult test. The government needs an excellent general like Minister Zhou to fully lead this work. The reporters naturally didn't believe this statement, but since the government gave the answer, then what they needed to do was to interpret this answer. They quickly took notes with their digital pens and silently waited for the question that they and the people of the Federation cared about the most. As for Colonel Sulu, the deputy minister of the Ministry of Justice frowned and chose his words carefully. He slowly said, "Yes, from a legal point of view, we can say that he is currently wanted by the Federation." The deputy minister looked at the reporters and continued to explain. Colonel Sulu left the West Woods region camp without permission. The military asked him to explain the situation, but he never reported it. In addition, according to the Bureau of Proclamations investigation, Colonel Sulu had a very close relationship with the suspect who died in the terrorist attack on Parliament Hill. However, regarding this point, he never reported it to his superiors. This is the entire reason for looking for Colonel Sulu? A reporter asked sharply. No. The deputy minister of the Ministry of Justice calmly replied, "I believe that you all participated in that report." The Federation government once suspended the investigation into the relationship between Colonel Sulu and the traitor mechanic Ufo. However, after the Bureau of Proclamation grasped the latest information, the Federal Central Computer automatically reactivated the previous wanted program. This also means that unless Colonel Sulu voluntarily surrenders himself, the wanted list will continue. After confirming that the Federation was looking for Sulu, this hero idol of the Federation who had just returned from the Empire not long ago, the reporters in front of the Ministry of Justice simultaneously fell into a state of shocked silence. The twilight of the evening slanted in from the end of the street, looking somewhat like a bloody, ghastly intent. As for what happened at the president's official residence, I don't know. You don't have to ask me. The deputy minister of the Ministry of Justice smiled and said, "However, I believe that if Colonel Sulu is brought to justice and the judicial process reaches the point where the evidence is made public, then the entire Federation will know the truth of the incident. Above and below the silent stone steps, the knowledgeable and experienced reporters found it difficult to suppress the emotions in their hearts as they let out a series of noisy exclamations of shock and astonishment. What they heard could not be written in the report, but they could keenly discern the hidden meaning behind these words. Could it be that the military operation last night, the president who was not in good health today, and the currently wanted Colonel Su Lu had some kind of terrifying connection? Reporter would have been quietly standing at the periphery of the crowd. He was wearing a woolen vest today, and the cigarette in his hand seemed to be constantly burning. He suddenly stretched out his hand. With Wood's status in the industry and with the Capital Special District Daily News, when he stretched out his hand, the reporters who were immersed in shocked discussions immediately fell silent. Wood furrowed his brows and took a deep drag on his cigarette before asking, "Mr. Deputy Minister, may I ask if the wanted list this time has anything to do with Colonel Su Lee's press conference yesterday afternoon?" The Deputy Minister of the Ministry of Justice silently looked at him with cold eyes and extremely simple and direct answered, "It has nothing to do with it. The hero of the Federation, Colonel Su Lu, became a criminal wanted by the Federation. This news would probably cause countless shocking discussions in the Federation Society, or even something more serious." The reporters ran around to record excitedly or thoughtfully, but there was no way to get close to the department they wanted to interview the most because that was the Federal Army. In the brand-new base office of the new 17th Armored Division in the suburbs of the capital, there was an extremely oppressive and tense atmosphere. The commander of the 1st Regiment, He narrowed his eyes and stared at the director of the 1st Military Region's Special Warfare Department in front of him without any intention of backing down. Although the other party's military rank was far higher than his, although the other party had military police with special powers, although the other party had an arrest warrant signed by the highest level of the military, he still did not want to back down. "I don't care what you people want to do, but this is my army, and those people are my soldiers. If you want to arrest them, then you have to get my permission." Colonel Helay's eyes narrowed into two dangerous slits. Standing behind him, Hua Xiao, Lin Ai, and the others also narrowed their eyes at the same time. It was very strange. Probably every person who had spent too much time with Su Lu would be affected by this small action of his. Every time they encountered the greatest anger or the most terrifying danger, the men's eyes would narrow, and with a blink of their eyelids, they would angrily crush everything in front of them into pieces. The director of the Special Warfare Department brought the arrest warrant of the highest level of the military over with military police. He never would have thought that before he even saw the members of Group 7, he would be stopped in the office by the officers of the 17th Division. "Colonel Helay, do you understand what you're doing right now?" The director of the Special Warfare Department stared into the eyes of the officers and said in a cold voice, "These officers under your command participated in a shocking rebellion last night. If you insist on disobeying military orders and protecting them, then perhaps the next time I come back, the target of arrest by the military police will be you." Chapter 763. You said it was Team 7 at the start, but you should know that ever since the 17th Division was rebuilt, there is no such thing as Team 7 in the Federal Forces or even the Nutshell Mercenaries. Even if there is, the entire Federation knows what kind of heroic and fearless fighting group Team 7 is. You actually accuse them of treason? Have you lost your mind? The 17th Division was an invincible iron division created by the military god Li Pifu. As the commander of the field forces, Hilay didn't care about the director of the Special Operations Room, who was said to be General Li Jiedu's trusted aide. He coldly stared back at the other. "You know you can't handle it alone." The director of the Special Operations Room suddenly laughed. He looked at Hilay's face and said with a bit of sarcasm, "You just said that Xiong Linquan and the other officers have been training in the camp for 2 consecutive nights and didn't go out. But don't forget, this is the 4th mission. We can apply to the Bureau of Proclamation to check the location of the chip at any time. When the time comes, you will bear the responsibility you should bear." Hilay was silent. He knew very well that if the rumors were true, that the Federation government and the upper echelons of the military were looking for the instructor, Then with just him as the commander, there was no way he could resist this vicious tide. Thinking back to the conversation between the instructor and General Lee Jae-do a few days ago, and then inexplicably going to the south to recuperate, his mood became abnormally irritated and depressed. But now that the instructor was in trouble, how could he hand over Xiong Lin Quan and the others? These people were not only the instructor's subordinates, they were also the most outstanding officers of the 17th Division. As for the instructor being wanted, fuck his grandma. Even if it was the female star with the biggest breasts in porn, she wouldn't believe it. Inside and outside the military camp, the tombs were as red as blood. The atmosphere was stifling. The director of the Special Operations Room had a gloomy expression. He turned around and prepared to leave with the military police. The next time he came back, the entire 17th Division officers would probably face an extremely difficult situation. At this moment, a hunched figure of an old man slowly walked out from the twilight. His hair was white, and his military uniform was casually draped over his thin body. He looked very old, but the footsteps of such an old soldier seemed to warm up the eerie twilight. The pupils of the director of the Special Warfare Room shrunk. He subconsciously raised his hand and saluted. Looking at the other person in shock, he frowned and asked, "Commander, aren't you recuperating in the south?" The old figure walked out of the blood-red twilight. Finally, one could see the sparkling golden stars on his shoulders. Back when the old man was in the 17th Division's logistics department, he was assigned to be in charge of the division's special kitchen because the food was to the division's liking. At best, he could be considered to have amazing culinary skills, but now he had become one of the Federation's two trump cards, the new 17th Division's division commander. With such a legendary and unimaginable military career, other than the amazing luck brought by the old division commander who ate his meals, Li Pifu, who dared to underestimate the intelligence and ability under this lazy appearance. Commander Yu Changhai smiled and casually returned a military salute. He walked into the office and answered casually, "Oh, the little nurse over there is too young and pretty. I really couldn't stand it, so I came back early." Nowadays, the most popular style of an iron-blooded soldier like Commander Du Shaoqing in the Federal Forces was Commander Yu. Commander Yu was probably the only general who spoke and acted like an old tramp. Speaking of which, people had probably long forgotten that the generation of military god, Li Pifu's generation of old soldiers, actually had this kind of indifferent attitude in their bones. Hearing this answer, the director of the Special Warfare Department was speechless. He knew very well how much effort General Lee Jae-do had put in to transfer this extremely senior division commander away from the new 17th Division. Who would have thought that at such a crucial moment, this person would actually quietly return to his own unit? Commander Yu Changhai smiled and greeted the officers under his command. He was as friendly as seeing a group of neighborhood children on the way back from the market. He, Lyle and I, and the other regiment commanders didn't dare to be careless. They stood at attention and saluted. For some reason, they felt relieved. Although the old division commander looked muddle-headed, old, weak, and tired, the soldiers of the 17th Division all had a common feeling. As long as the old division commander was here, then there was no real difficulty in the world. "I've heard everything you've said," Li Mu said. Commander Yu Changhai sat back in his chair with some difficulty and sighed with satisfaction. He stretched out two thin and old fingers and waved them in the air. He looked at the director of the Special Warfare Department and the military police in front of him and said with a smile, "I have a few words that I want you to listen to carefully." Lyle and I had already taken out a cigarette and put it in between the old division commander's thin fingers with a flattering expression. Then he carefully lit it with his hand, even though there was only the warm twilight in the room right now, and there wasn't a trace of cold wind. The director of the Special Warfare Department's face was pale as he looked at Commander Yu Changhai without saying a word. A lot of people know that this division and these soldiers are the division and soldiers of the old marshal. I'm in charge of this 17th Division, but I'm just in charge. One day, according to the old marshal's wishes, I will hand it over to that guy. Commander Yu Changhai spread out his hands and mocked. What happened in the end? That guy went to flirt with a big star and then went to the Empire to play around. He was busy accepting interviews every day, and slowly, it seems that everyone forgot about this matter. What about the government and the military? It seems that they don't want you to hand this division over to him. Motherfucker. Commander Yu Qinghai laughed and said, that guy doesn't seem to have the self-awareness to take over. Some people also don't want him to take over, so they can only let this old man take over. But in the end, being in charge is just being in charge. So a few days ago, someone asked me to go to the military hospital to recuperate, so I went. But to be honest, the food in the military hospital's recuperation center is really bad. Suddenly, Commander Yu Qinghai's expression became serious and said, but since it has come to this situation today, it seems that I can only continue to be in charge of this division. Since that's the case, the people you want to arrest are my soldiers. Do you think this is appropriate? The director of the Special Warfare Department swallowed with difficulty and explained in a low voice, this is an order from the highest level. Colonel Su Lu is suspected of... Commander Yu Qinghai suddenly jumped up from the chair. Such an old general was actually more agile than a rabbit. It was really amazing. I don't care about Su Lu. When he came back from the Empire, you transferred him away. It's fine that you don't want to leave this guy to me, but those guys are my soldiers. Do you fucking know what it means to be my soldiers? He used the finger that was holding the cigarette to stab the director's face across the air and roared furiously. Rebel your ass. They went to the city yesterday for a stroll. Is that a rebellion? Who the fuck made this rule? Even if he was just a chef in the past, now he was the general of the chefs. And there was a saying in the Federation that an angry chef was definitely the most terrifying person in the world. Then what about an angry chef general? The twilight sprinkled on the floor of the room. The director of the Special Warfare Department faced the storm of curses and anger. He felt as if he was standing in a pool of blood on the battlefield. His face suddenly turned pale, and he struggled to refute, but He just said that those officers have been staying in the barracks these days. You believe what he said? Are you a pig? Did you hit the synthetic meat? Commander Yu Qinghai's eyes widened, and he waved the cigarette between his fingers like he was waving a kitchen knife. He lied. Do you want to arrest him and shoot him? If you want to arrest my people on the charges of treason, show us the evidence. If you can't show us the evidence, then fuck off. The director of the Special Warfare Department, whose face quickly changed between green and red, was stung by the smoke in front of him. He subconsciously clenched his fists tightly, thinking to himself, I'm also a major general. If it wasn't for the fact that this old man has a lot of experience and a lot of achievements, I wouldn't have allowed you to insult me like this. Right at this time, Commander Yu Qinghai strangely calmed down and patted the director's shoulder with a smile. The change in mood was so fast that it was truly shocking. It was as if the old general who jumped around like an angry old rabbit in the twilight didn't exist at all. Please tell General Li Jiedu that we are the federal forces. Commander Yu Qinghai was silent for a moment, and then said with an extremely serious tone, we abide by the Federation's laws and regulations. Don't worry about the 17th Division mutiny. As soon as these words were spoken, the entire room fell silent. Whether they would or would not, whether they would need to worry, no one dared to think about the two words mutiny. Even more so, no one thought that Teacher Yu would actually be so shrewd and ruthless despite his age. Everyone was silent in their hearts. The director of the Special Warfare Department had an extremely ugly expression. He had probably never encountered such a crazy situation in his entire life in the military. This isn't a threat. Commander Yu Qinghai gazed at the twilight outside the door and said with a sigh, the marshal's troops are trustworthy. Remember to tell him that this troop is his father's life's work. It's worth cherishing. Facing the strong resistance of the new 17th Armored Division, from the commander to the ordinary soldiers, the major general who had personally come to arrest them and the military police directly under the command of the military headquarters were like a pack of wolves frightened by an old rabbit. They silently left the base. Commander, Xiong Lin Quan and the others who had been nervously hiding behind the room walked out from behind the door. They saluted the old general in the twilight with gratitude and admiration. Then they reported with shame that Gu Shifeng and a dozen other members had been arrested by the other troops last night. Right now, they didn't know where they were locked up. Why are you telling me this? Why are you telling me this? Commander Yu Chunghai's eyes suddenly widened, and the traces of blood were particularly clear. He said angrily, "So what if I know? Do you really expect me to charge into the capital with the entire division, take over the Ministry of Justice, and establish a new government?" Everyone was silent. "You're the one who said such crazy things. We didn't even dare to think about it." Commander Yu Qinghai paused for a moment and then said, "I understand Li Jiedu. He respects the ordinary soldiers and won't destroy the foundation of the Federation. After all, he is a member of the Oldley family. The key is Su Lu and you guys. Where did you guys go? What's going on?" Xiong Lin Quan hurried forward and honestly told him the things they knew. After listening to their explanation, Commander Yu Qinghai was silent for a long time. Then he sighed and said, "The troops now feel more and more different from the troops of the past. They're more formal and powerful, but I always feel that something is missing. The smell of green onions or the smell of humans. Each generation is worse than the last." This veteran who had participated in countless battles with the military god Li Piffle looked at the bloody twilight and commented angrily, "They're all a bunch of fucking bastards, including Su-le." Chapter 764. Ambush. We've been ambushed. Gamma, retreat. Retreat. Captain, we can't hold the position anymore. 30 wolf fangs. I have 30 wolf fangs here. I repeat, requesting air support. Our electromagnetic beam cluster has failed. It has failed. Air support hasn't arrived yet. The anxious and hoarse voice came to an abrupt end with the cold sound of metal rubbing against each other. On the charred slope, a black and blue wolf fong mech of the Imperium was half-squatting indifferently outside of the Federation's quick-solidifying cement works. It slowly pulled out an alloy blade from the square firing hole. The micro-engines attached to the mechanical joints of the mech hummed like the low roars of a herd of beasts, vibrating the dry air. The violent explosion was like a large cold flower blooming in the field. On the hillside, the Empire's wolf fong mechs leaped at high speed. Relying on their advantage in numbers, they successfully entangled the few black MX mechs in the Federation's army. Not too long after, those few black MX mechs toppled over like giants and exploded, smashing heavily into the ground. The ground trembled slightly from the impact, and the Federation soldiers around them revealed looks of despair. The cockpit of the Federation's black MXs was still spitting out terrifying sparks. Dozens of Empire's wolf fangs had already jumped up at high speed in strange postures and attacked the Federal forces. The left mechanical arm of the mecha spat out a soul-devouring rain of bullets, and the alloy blade at the front of the right mechanical arm kept stabbing into the weakest side armor of the Federation's armored vehicles. Although not every stab was successful, there were still tragic scenes of vehicles collapsing and people dying from time to time. The black smoke mixed with the dry and hot air enveloped the entire battlefield. The twilight of the distant star couldn't even penetrate the smoke. The blood-red light was wrapped in the black smoke, looking like black blood that was about to solidify in the soil. In this dark, blood-like twilight, the Federation troops, who were at an absolute disadvantage, bravely and desperately launched the craziest counterattack. However, in the end, they could only become corpses or even sad fragments. This was the Empire's Ink Flower planet, an ordinary administrative planet located between the L9 and X3 systems. In the past few days, the Federation and the Empire's military had simultaneously increased their investment in this administrative planet. The Federation had to seize this strategic location in the L9 system for the late spring offensive, while the Empire had used that magnificent retreat to successfully buy time. The massive Empire had finally made preparations for an all-out war, and they wanted to use the complete victory on planet Mo Hua to announce to the entire universe that they would not take a single step back. The scenes of the desperate battle that took place above were played out from time to time in various areas of the planet. However, The offensive and defensive battles in the fields and on the hillsides gave off a strange flavor. Both the Federation command and the Empire found it incomprehensible because of the great disparity in strength here. The real-time signals on the battlefield were quickly transmitted to the Federal Forces' forward base on Planet Yellow Disaster. The conference room was deathly silent, the officers' expressions complicated as they looked at the commander under the giant screen in front of them, silently enduring his anger. General Enchanting, the commander-in-chief of the Federation's front lines, stared at the slightly delayed satellite image like an injured eagle. After confirming that he could no longer receive any signal from that camp, he took a deep breath and angrily slammed his right fist on the control panel. The violent force caused the white hair on his head to tremble incessantly. What is wrong with the intelligence report? The results of the calculations are not like this. Why is it that what the General Staff believes to be a small harassment force has several dozen damned wolf fangs hidden inside? Commander, he quickly calmed down, the veins on his neck popping and disappearing. He stared coldly at the officers in the General Staff Department and the Bureau of Proclamations technical team beside him, his brows furrowed as he said, "There might be problems with the charter computer, but you staff officers cannot have problems with your brains." An officer from the Bureau of Proclamation stood up and explained in a low voice, "Right now, we still don't know if there is a problem with the information collection or a problem with the calculation program. We are conducting a post-mortem investigation." Commander, he didn't even look at this person. Ever since he participated in the war with the Marshal many years ago, he didn't have the slightest good impression of those Bureau of Proclamation officials who followed the army like ghosts. He stared coldly at the staff officers under him and said, "How many times do I have to repeat this? War is a war of people. We need the calculation results of the charter computer, but we cannot rely on it." In this attack and defense battle on planet Mo, the Federal forces suffered extremely heavy losses. The entire regiment was pincered by the Empire's army from 3 sides, suffering heavy casualties. The camp that took on the most difficult mission might not even be able to keep its designation. In this huge war of the Federation's invasion of the Empire, today's losses were not the most terrifying. It was far from the counterattack that was directly commanded by the Empire's princess last year. In that battle, the commander who succeeded in using his own stupidity to bury thousands of Federation soldiers had already been punished by the military court. A battle of this scale didn't even need the Federation's commander-in-chief to personally command. In fact, the commander of this battle was indeed not him, so the officers in the base didn't really understand why the general was so angry. Commander, he walked out of the command room with a gloomy face. The orderlies quickly followed him with a large alloy cup on the table. Like the battlefield in the distance, the base of Huang, it was also in the evening. General Enchanting frowned as he stood in the blood-red twilight. He couldn't calm his emotions for a long time. That regiment was from the West Woods, from the 4th Military Region. They had just arrived at the front line, but they suffered such a heavy blow. Tiger was dead. It was said that there was a problem with the Ancient Bell incident. Just a moment ago, it was said that something big happened in the capital. The West Woods troops were ordered by the government to come to the front line of the Empire. This had already aroused the suspicion and anger of many people in the West Woods. At this time, any troop could be in trouble, but only the troops in the West Woods couldn't be in trouble, especially this kind of trouble that could easily cause people to find excuses and reasons to be angry. Standing on the balcony of the Constitutional Bureau and looking at the lawn that had been designated as an absolutely restricted area tens of thousands of years ago, Li Zidao, who was holding a teacup, smiled and said, "I heard that old Director Tai's main hobby was to play golf. With such a large lawn as his practice field, no wonder no one in the entire Capital Special District was his opponent." The work of the Bureau of Proclamation is very mysterious in the eyes of ordinary people. In fact, it is very boring. If you don't find some hobbies, it is very difficult to continue doing it for a long time. What is even more disgusting is that according to the regulations of the Bureau of Proclamation, as long as you swear to work in the Bureau of Proclamation, you are not allowed to do any other work. Cui Zedong, who was standing beside him, answered in a low voice. He looked a little tired. In the past few days, because of that problem, as long as the acting director of the Bureau of Proclamation stayed in the Bureau of Proclamation building, he would feel that there was a ghost hiding in the depths of the ground, coldly looking at him. After pausing for a moment, he forced a smile and said, "The road you came from is cut off in front of the building. According to the old director, it means that once you enter this building, you don't have to go out again." Lee Jae-do frowned slightly and said in a light voice, "It sounds like you have the intention of retreating." "There is no way to retreat because I am old and have no one to rely on," Chui Jadong answered calmly. "Ask me a question that I have always been concerned about." Lee Jae-do didn't want to probe too deeply into the mental world of this important partner of his. So he asked, changing key data and causing the death of a citizen of the Federation, in my logic, should have already violated the second of the 3 core laws of the Charter. The first of the 3 laws was, do not hurt people, and do not stand by, and do nothing when people are hurt. The second law was, obey all orders of people, but do not violate the first law. The charter computer is dead. Chui Jadong suddenly frowned, as if he didn't really believe what he said. After a moment of silence, he continued, but people are alive, and it can't judge the purpose of humans. In fact, for tens of thousands of years, countless people who have worked in this building have already found many ways to cheat the central computer's logic program. We usually call those program loopholes the back door. Is that how the saying of going through the back door came about? Lee Jae-do smiled and shook his head. He sighed and said, your Bureau of Proclamation is indeed the most terrifying department in the Federation. What I don't understand now is if we're going through the back door, then which door did Su Lu use? Chui Jadong looked at the lawn below the balcony. The lawn that was as smooth as the central computer's program seemed to be burning under the setting sun. We have simulated and calculated many times, but we still don't know how he used his first sequence authority to make the central computer cooperate with his actions. For example, those mechas from last night. Unless he can actively contact the central computer, but this is absolutely forbidden by the core program. Then what about physical operations? In the official residence this morning, you also mentioned that the central computer is strictly forbidden from physical operations. Lee Jae-do's expression became somewhat complicated. He turned around to look at the box-like building behind him and suddenly said, I'm thinking, if at this time Su Lu directly orders the central computer to blow up this building, what other choice do we have other than to die? I'm not worried about this happening. Going back to last night, those mechas didn't make a single fatal attack on the Iron 7 Division. The 3 laws still exist. And fortunately, they still exist. Otherwise, I really would have gone crazy. Of course, before I went crazy, this world would have been destroyed. Chui Jadong laughed self-deprecatingly, then looked at Lee Jae-do seriously and asked, regarding the issue of his authority, can you solve it? Lee Jae-do was silent for a moment before saying, too much time has passed since that explosion. That little girl's biological marker from back then has already lost its effect, so I'm looking for another way. Chui Jadong didn't ask any more questions on this issue. He said, actually, I really admire your foresight. At the time, everyone thought that Su Lu was dead, but you're the only one who thought that he might still be alive and that he might be able to cause damage to Mr. President's career. He looked thoughtfully at the burning lawn below the balcony and said softly, last time, in order to eliminate those Iron 7 Division members, the Bureau of Proclamation performed a reverse operation and changed the frontline data. Now that I think about it, it really is very similar to the scene on Mo Hua Planet today. Chapter 765. In the end, Dong Fangyu became the scapegoat. I'm a bit worried. If teacher Xiaoqing finds out the truth in the future, will he? Chui Jadong didn't ask any more questions, and Lee Jae-do didn't answer either. Instead, he talked about the method he used to deal with the members of Group 7. No matter how great and complicated a cause is, it's all made up of specific details. That's why I won't overlook any details, and I won't underestimate any potential enemies. For example, that officer named by Yulon, or those members who seemed like they couldn't cause any trouble. Many people seem to have forgotten the hidden backgrounds behind those members. Even if Su Lu really did die, if those members were united by someone with the intention of forming a force, that force would still be very impressive. He suddenly had a trace of self-deprecation. In all these years, I've only made one mistake in this regard. In the end, because of this mistake, Byron and those old fellows left us before we could see victory. You're talking about Shi Qinghai? Cui Zhedong asked. Yes, Shi Qinghai. Li Jiedu's gaze was complicated. I thought I had already paid enough attention to him, and I made a very powerful arrangement to end his life. But in the end, I realized that this person deserved more attention. Killing him should have been done even more. In the twilight, Cui Zhedong suddenly said, I heard that teacher Yu is back. Old people always have a temper. They don't want to stay in the sanatorium for long. We can only respect his wishes. Li Jiedu lowered his gaze slightly and said indifferently, but now that the front lines are in a state of emergency and the offensive at the end of spring may be delayed, I think that the front lines need iron soldiers like the new 17th Division. The problem is that the front lines suffered a setback this time, and only one regiment failed. Cui Zhedong quickly understood what he meant. He was shocked and frowned as he voiced his doubts. Li Jiedu walked into the room with his teacup and said indifferently, most of the time, propaganda is used to exaggerate the front line's victory, but sometimes it can also be used to exaggerate losses. For this failure, the government will definitely need someone to stand up and take responsibility. There will also need to be some changes. Army mutiny? This new generation leader of the military had never worried about this problem. Yu Chenghai's sudden return to the 17th Division from the sanatorium had indeed brought him some trouble, but he could not use forceful methods to suppress the other's anger. Thus, he quickly came up with a new plan to bring the 17th Division back to the front lines in the shortest time possible. He could have used simpler and tougher methods to deal with the problem of the 17th Division, but they were in the midst of a war. Even the craziest and most ambitious person knew that the army could not be in chaos, and there could not be any risk factors of division. As for the Westwood's troops that were loyal to the Zhong family, they had to be slowly weakened and disintegrated in such a secretive way and finally be melted into the furnace of the federal forces. More importantly, Li Jiedu's connections and control in the military, other than the young officers, the most important ones were the military leaders who had gradually left. These real leaders were his father's most loyal subordinates. No matter how much they admired Su Lu, they would not stand against him just because of Su Lu. Just like how Commander Yu Chenghai had very naturally lamented. Li Jiedu is still a member of the old Li family after all. In other words, in the eyes of these leaders, he was still one of them, a child they had watched grow up. No matter what he did, he should just be naughty and mischievous. But if he really used forceful methods to deal with Yu Chenghai, it would truly disappoint these leaders. The leaders who had already left were still the real leaders of the military, such as General Miles. Furthermore, a leader like Enchanting was now the Federation's frontline commander. Li Jiedu was definitely not willing to take the risk of disappointing these people just because of Yu Chenghai alone. Moving the difficult to deal with Commander Yu Chenghai and his 17th Division to the front lines would not raise any objections from these leaders. These old fellows who were used to being iron-blooded naturally believed that the old division commander's troops should naturally grow on the battlefield. But Du Shaoqing and his Iron 7th Division would probably be more willing to fight against the Empire on the front lines and not chase after that guy around the Federation's own city. Last night from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m., where were you? In a dark room, a Federation Investigation Bureau official lowered his body and stared like a wolf at the chubby man in front of him, who looked extremely honest. He was almost roaring as he interrogated. I forgot. Forgot? How come I remember that you were arrested in the Ministry of Finance building's toilet? You still ask if you know? Gu Shifeng's eyes widened as she looked at the crazy guy in front of her. She thought to herself, is this a cop movie? How can there be such a retarded dialogue? Why did you appear in the Ministry of Finance building so late at night? The Federation Investigation Bureau official angrily unbuckled his belt. His movements were very handsome and fierce, just like a character in a movie. Gu Shifeng's eyes were still wide open as she said, because the scenery was good from that angle. The official was stunned for a long time before he slammed the table and loudly questioned, "Then how do you explain the equipment we found in the toilet?" "Fuck, I'm a soldier. Of course, I have to bring equipment to eat." Gu Shifeng was clearly even angrier than the official who interrogated her. She slammed the table with even more force than the other party. Her voice was also louder and more confident. "I've been to the front lines. I'm a war hero. What's with your attitude? You're not allowed to torture a war hero." May 17th, 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. Where were you? The obviously tired official rubbed his messy hair and stared at Gu Shifeng across the table. "I don't know." Gu Shifeng slammed the table heavily and angrily shouted at the Federation Investigation Bureau official, "Don't do anything. I'm a soldier. I've been to the front lines. I'm a war hero." The members of Team 7, who were arrested around Charter Square, were now detained in an abandoned factory in the suburbs of the capital. They were under joint investigation by the FBI and the military police department. Just like this, they repeated the boring process. God knows how many days had passed. Group 7 was a hero group that the Federation government had put a lot of effort into building. Who in the Federation hadn't seen the documentary? This place wasn't far from the front lines of the Federation, so the members were treated well when they were locked up. They weren't handcuffed and were even housed in a dormitory. It really made these guys recall their days as new recruits. Seeing Gu Shifeng being pushed in by the military police, Da Vinci, who was scratching his feet, mocked, "Boss Gu, don't tell me you only know how to say the same few words over and over again. Fuck, don't you find it annoying to say the same few words every day?" He moved his left leg with some difficulty and said with a smile, "You should learn from me. I scolded the head of the military police today. They don't dare to use torture, so why shouldn't they scold me?" The members in the room all agreed. "Stop talking nonsense." Gu Shifeng sat down on the bed and subconsciously flicked his 10 round fingers on the bed. "I'm not like you guys. I don't have a governor for a father, and I don't have a billionaire for a grandfather. If those guys really want to torture me, I can't do anything." The members heard this and didn't care about Gu Shifeng's status as a temporary commander. They all mocked him for hating his father for not being an official. Da Vinci's father was the governor of Xixia State. Like him, many of the members of the team had extremely terrifying backgrounds. The Federation Investigation Bureau and military police wanted to torture this group of young masters. That would probably cause a large group of Federation officials to protest angrily. Back then, President Pabre had sent these hedonistic soldiers who lived corrupt lives in the Harbor City Garrison District to Sulu for political reasons. But who would have thought that these hedonistic soldiers would actually be turned into the most outstanding Federation soldiers by Sulu? Now, the backgrounds and family backgrounds of these hedonistic soldiers had become a big problem for the president's official residence. Sulu, this Donglin rock, had once successfully resisted the pressure of the Federation officials and turned these hedonistic soldiers into sweaty red meat on the training field. President Pabre, this Donglin rock, had to manage the Federation, but he couldn't be as valiant and cold as him. Speaking of which, you guys have always been unconvinced by the old members. Gu Shifeng rolled his eyes amidst the laughter of his team members and said mockingly, "Now you see the difference, right? I told you not to touch this guy, and what happened? All the old guys ran away, and you guys were all caught. Huh, look at Da Vinci's pathetic appearance. He actually got shot. That's true. The bullet doesn't know you're the eldest son of the governor's family." Da Vinci couldn't take it anymore. He glared and shouted, "Boss Gu, I'm going to flip out if you say that. Also, you have to call me by my full name, Da Vinci." After a pause, he said shamelessly, "Speaking of which, you're also an old member. How did you get caught like us?" Gu Shifeng's face turned red. In order to avoid this shameful question, he quickly became serious and said to his team members, "Apart from the fact that you guys have terrifying backgrounds, there's another reason why the government is so polite to us. If the boss isn't caught by them, they won't dare go too far. If there's a problem with the boss, I'm warning you guys, even if you have some good fathers, there will still be problems. It had to be said that his method of changing the topic was very successful. The team members in the dormitory collectively fell silent. They weren't worried about how they would be hurt, but they were worried about the boss's current safety. In an extremely inconspicuous coffee shop in the capital, Chief Editor Bob wiped the sweat from his forehead. He looked at the young man wearing a hat and said self-deprecatingly, "Literati are literati after all. They're useless. I've never been as nervous as I am today. Expressing bravery in the newspaper is indeed much easier than in reality. Don't worry, I'm sure no one followed you here." The young man used his index finger to push up the brim of his hat and revealed a comfortable smile. Suddenly, he heard a commotion outside the coffee shop. He looked out the window in confusion, and a moment later, his small eyes revealed shock and complicated emotions. There was a sunset in the sky above the street at dusk. It was as red as blood, and there was a group of young students wearing black masks. They were from the Capital University. They walked silently under the gazes of the people on both sides of the street. In the front row, they held two long banners. "We use silence to denounce the persecution of the Federation's heroes. Colonel Sulu, you're not alone. I'm going to be pushed out of next week's rankings. I'll have to trouble everyone to use your fingers. My job is to use my fingers, so I know this job is really hard. 2 chapters tomorrow. If you're good enough and find the state you're in today and write happily, then 3 chapters. But it'll be difficult. I said I was in a good state today. So the answer is, I smoked today. Yes, I'll continue to quit tomorrow. I swear, within a week after I finish these cigarettes in front of me, I'll smoke another cigarette. I can't expect to earn a single cent from writing in this lifetime." Chapter 766. Bob watched the young students wearing black masks walk past the window. He smiled at Sulu and said, "Although no one knows the truth of the incident, I think you should feel a little proud that so many people support you without asking for any reason." Sulu lowered his head and slowly and seriously stirred the black coffee in the cup until the burnt smell that he didn't like was completely removed. He said softly, "I'm a little touched, but it's hard for me to feel proud." He raised his head, and his straight eyebrows under the shadow of his hat appeared particularly calm. "The reason lies in what you said about not asking for any reason. Now, the people in the Federation still believe that I'm a hero of the Federation, so they support me without any reason. But what if I'm really a criminal who uses the mask of a hero to hide his evil?" Chief Editor Bob frowned. He didn't understand why he felt this way. The scene just now reminded me of the Macklin Project. When we were trying very hard to send that senator to court, the streets of the entire Federation were filled with angry young students. Sulu looked at the chief editor and said, "Which should have already told you that the guy who sent the evidence to the newspaper was the attacker who broke into Parliament Hill a few days ago. He's also my best friend. I also know that this guy named Shi Qinghai participated in the assassination of Macklin with you. Of course, after that, he was tacitly approved by the Federation government, and the so-called assassination became a purge operation." Bob was still frowning and asked, "But why would you think of this? The people on the streets may have misjudged and supported the wrong side, but I've always insisted that they don't need to be responsible for these things. Because the Federation government, the Parliament, and those big shots in the upper class have never given the people a chance to know the really important information, such as the evidence in the Macklin Project. In the end, it only became a bargaining chip between the government and those families to exchange benefits. You're saying that this is the information of George Carlin." Bob said, "Information asymmetry will inevitably lead to social injustice." Sulu was still slowly stirring the black coffee in his cup, but he had no intention of drinking it. He said, "I haven't read many articles in this area, but I know that there seems to be a saying in the intellectual world that people who easily fall into a collective unconscious frenzy are exposed to too much information that is too complicated to distinguish. It's not a good thing. Although I've always been considered a liberal gatekeeper, I agree with some sayings. There is no absolute freedom in the universe, and there is no absolute disclosure of information." Bob picked up the porcelain cup in front of him, looked at Sulu, and said seriously, "For example, What if the people of the Empire knows about confidential information that involves the security of the Federation? The problem is that the power to determine whether or not this information endangers the security of the Federation has always been in the hands of a very small number of people. As long as they want to, they can even treat the details of the Federation's tax budget as important economic secrets. Su Lu shrugged slightly and said, also, before the 37th constitutional calendar, the Federation had no enemies in the universe at all. So naturally, there was no information that could endanger the security of the Federation. But at that time, was there any real information that could be publicly disclosed? Bob tilted his head and thought for a moment, then shook his head with a smile. He took a sip of the slightly hot coffee, wiped the trace of sweat on his cheek, and said with a serious expression, I took such a big risk today to meet with a wanted criminal of the Federation. The dim and psychedelic light shone through the floor-to-ceiling window on the seat in the corner, and the faint light reflected on the screen reflected on Chief Editor Bob's face. The waiter and the customers at the next table did not notice the movement at the table. Naturally, they did not know what the faint light meant to the entire Federation. Chief Editor Bob was silent for a long time. Occasionally, he opened his mouth in shock and looked at Su Lu. He wanted to say something or ask something, but in the end, he just lowered his head and looked at the screen again. Only the rapid change of expression on his face proved that the content had a strong mental impact on the best journalist in the Federation. During this process, Su Lu also remained silent. He looked at the chief editor's expression and stirred the black coffee slowly and evenly with a metal spoon in his hand. Unbelievable. Chief Editor held Su Li's mobile phone tightly with his right hand. He frowned and let out the most normal sigh. The other side of the table remained silent. After a while, he laughed self-deprecatingly and muttered to himself, but I can't not believe it. After another long silence, Chief Editor Bob frowned. He seemed to be using a lot of effort to suppress some kind of impulse. He looked at Su Lu and said in a low voice, at this time, I suddenly regret coming to see you. I regret seeing these things. Why? Su Lu asked. I admire Mr. President very much. You can even say that I am one of his staunch supporters. In the confrontation between the government and those families, I stood by his side without hesitation and was willing to wave the flag and shout for him. In my opinion, the 5 years of President Pabre's first term were definitely the best 5 years in the history of the Federation. I know his ambitions and can feel his ideals. Chief Editor Bob's expression gradually calmed down. His eyes flashed with complex emotions. He said, and this mobile phone you handed over destroyed the last trace of my imagination of a beautiful future. I even think that perhaps you will destroy all of the efforts of Mr. President and this government. Su Lu could understand. To be more precise, he could more easily understand the chief editor's feelings of loss and frustration at this moment than anyone else. Before that night, he and the chief editor had placed all of their imaginations and hopes for a beautiful future for the Federation on the dark-skinned, middle-aged man in the official residence. When these imaginations and hopes suddenly turned into bubbles, the feeling of betrayal was very uncomfortable and even made people subconsciously refuse to accept it. Even if it was Chief Editor Bob, after seeing this evidence, there would probably be countless fierce struggles in his heart. He would rather not see it or destroy all of this evidence and pretend that this had never happened. Su Lu was willing for the chief editor across the table to make this choice because in the Federation society with tens of billions of people, he was already very lonely. Even if the students wearing black masks on the demonstration said that he would not be lonely, he was still lonely. He did not want his last companion to leave him. Very suddenly, he stopped stirring the black coffee and raised his head to look across the table. In a low voice, he repeated a very famous speech in the Federation. This is a great era where vast fleets are on expeditions to the brilliant universe, where countless brave warriors step forward one after another, where the strong survival and the glorious sacrifice reflect each other, and thus appear to be incomparably magnificent. Behind this great era, There is a small life where the price of protein meat rises again. The uncle next door loses his job. The business of the underground casino deteriorates. The guard yawns more often. The aunt next door gets a raise. And the daughter is worried about her poor results in the spring exam, and the small life where her pocket money is reduced. Whether it is a great era or a small life, it is actually full of brave people and timid people. They will be happy because of victory, sad because of failure, and angry because of many things. The only difference between the two is the attitude when facing difficulties and power. A low and calm voice slowly sounded in the corner of the coffee shop. Chief Editor Bob, who was listening carefully, gradually relaxed his deeply furrowed brows. He seemed to be deep in thought. This is the speech that you specially wrote for the Nebula Award. At that time, when I received the award, I felt very honored and have always remembered it in my heart. Sula narrowed his eyes and said, I will not doubt your firm belief in fighting against power. But what I want to say is, if power is dressed in the perfect clothes of idealism, or even idealism itself, we will still resist to the end. These 5 years may be the best 5 years in the history of the Federation, the best era, but for the waitresses in the Lynn High State Gymnasium, for the West Woods soldiers on the Antique Bell, and for the families of the innocent victims, these 5 years are definitely the worst days they have ever lived. Chief Editor Bob's face showed a calm smile again. He took a sip of the cold coffee, and after a moment of silence, he asked, Well, what do you want us to do? Wood and I will immediately start to do an in-depth report in this area, but the gentleman in the official residence has countless pairs of white gloves. We can't accuse him. No, you misunderstood me. I don't want the Capital Special District Daily newspaper to risk the government's anger to report. Schiller said that the gun is always more powerful than the pen. Chief Editor Bob slightly frowned and asked puzzledly, Then why did you want to see me today and give me this evidence? Sulu looked at the untouched black coffee in front of him. After a long silence, he said, I just hope that even if I die, something like the truth can be left behind. If I really die this time, then whether it is 5 or 10 years later, you, in your newspaper, will have the opportunity to tell this true story to everyone. Chapter 767. Late spring was about to end, and the heat of the summer had arrived. Sulu pulled down the brim of his hat, wrapped his coat around his arm, and hurriedly walked across the street, sticking close to the row of blooming trees. Using the last bit of twilight, he quickly left the area. After passing through a few quiet alleys and through the sea of people wearing black masks, he lowered his head and quickened his pace. Following the long and slanted tunnel, he entered the subway station. While no one was looking, he opened the door to the room behind the station, climbed over the windowsill, and jumped off the dark track. In the distance, there was a subway coming at a high speed. He squinted his eyes and moved forward against the light. His body accurately stepped on the only safe zone that was found by the old guy's precise calculation. He didn't care about the vibrating air at all. The light from the subway shone on his face, but there was no trace of expression. There was no sound of friction between the heavy carriage and the smooth special track. In the sometimes dark and sometimes bright underground tunnel, there was only the sound of the air being rapidly compressed. The high-speed carriage passed by him at high speed. His clothes fluttered in the wind, but it didn't move his silent body. Only his hat was blown away by the wind and rolled very far away. The subway drove away. He opened a maintenance door in the dark tunnel, lifted the heavy mechanical pressure valve, and jumped down. He returned to his own underground world, the underground network of the Capital Special District. In the depths of the slightly damp dark tunnel, there was a bed, a lamp, and a few books. He didn't know where he got these things. Rubbing his hair that was messed up by the wind, Sulu lay down heavily on the bed. While he was recovering from his exhaustion, he always felt that someone was coldly watching him. It wasn't him or her, it was them. Somewhere in the capital, there was a very ordinary-looking building. On the top floor of the building, there was a door made of alloy. A small eye pattern was hastily painted on the door with non-toxic paint. The paint hadn't completely dried yet, so it was obvious that it was painted not long ago. The exaggerated small eye in the pattern was particularly strange. The pupil under the single eyelid was deliberately painted red, which made it look somewhat terrifying. Behind the closed door, there were more than 30 people sitting or standing. There were white-haired old men, outstanding graduates, majors from the Special Warfare Room of the military region, experts from the Research Institute of the Federation, and even a few highly intelligent criminals who had just been pardoned by the government. Because of the reward, the legal reduction of sentence, the order of the superiors, the sense of honor, and various other reasons, you have agreed to join this team. Then, I must remind you that before this team completes the ultimate mission, you are not allowed to leave, you are not allowed to contact your family, and you must maintain absolute confidentiality. A high-ranking official of the Federation government stood at the front. Looking at the crowd that did not seem to be anything special, he said coldly, "If you agree to this agreement, please sign the relevant waiver certificate and swear to the charter. Now, can you tell us what this damn ultimate mission is?" A criminal who had just been released from the Fox Castle space prison muttered. Although he was willing to do anything for this damn government, including killing his own brother, in order to get rid of the miserable 5-year black prison sentence. And he was known as the third strongest person in the Philadelphia cultivation gym. He believed that he had the ability to complete all the missions. However, everything he saw in the past 2 days made him, who had a sensitive criminal sense, catch the scent of extreme danger. The high-ranking official of the Federation government said, with a smile, "Your team is officially named Small Eyes. Your mission is to arrest or kill a very famous man with small eyes." In the following time, the members of the team nagged about their dissatisfaction with the name of the organization. Some people thought that the word small sounded too stupid, while some people directly thought that the name was naturally too stupid. Some people thought that it was mainly because they felt stupid when they introduced themselves, but in fact they knew very well that these nagging were just to get rid of the pressure and fear in their hearts. Perhaps not everyone knew what kind of terrifying ability the man with small eyes had, but the entire Federation knew the name Sulu and knew what it meant. To arrest or kill him. This mission was like a terrifying mountain that pressed down on them, making them feel incomparably terrified and flustered to the point where they almost could not breathe. However, some members of Small Eyes did not complain incessantly. They were extremely silent. Some people were directly crushed by the truth of the mission, while others valiantly maintained their confidence and determination. According to all the information we have seen in the past 2 days, we can confirm that because of Colonel Sue Lee's first sequence authority, it is fundamentally impossible to rely on the Bureau of Proclamation to locate his chip. Then, the most important problem for us now is to reestablish an effective monitoring and information collection system. The expert from the Federation Bureau of Investigation pointed at the rotating images on the screen and explained to his colleagues, "We have now activated the 36 military satellites orbiting S1. At the same time, we have also activated the 5 high-precision electron telescopes on the Old Moon base and a New Moon base. At the same time, the Federation Bureau of Investigation has granted us access to the second-level monitoring network. This means that we can see all the images that are happening through the 6 billion probes that are spread across every corner of this planet." "What kind of comparison system are we using?" someone asked. "Human data filtering system and facial recognition technology," the official of the Federation Bureau of Investigation explained. "With so much redundant information, how do we pick out the images we need?" According to the information, even the Federal Central Computer is on Colonel Sue Lee's side. The person continued to ask. The official interrupted him and emphasized, "Its first sequence authority, it doesn't mean that the Federal Central Computer is on the other side." "Well, no matter what, the Federal Central Computer doesn't seem to want us to catch him." "Then, where are you going to build a large-scale computational synthesizer to filter this redundant information?" "The calculation is still done by the Federal Central Computer. You don't have to worry about this." The official of the Bureau of Proclamation, who had been sitting silently by the podium, raised his head and looked at the investigation team members. The Federal Central Computer's work is divided into many areas, and they don't affect each other. It will respond to all data calculation requests. Even so, I still don't think this is feasible. The person shook his head and said, "This planet is so big. Besides, he might have already left and gone to Donglin or somewhere else." The professor of psychology from Linhai's Evergreen College raised his electronic pen and gestured to speak. After a comprehensive evaluation of the target's behavior pattern over the years, it can be confirmed that he is extremely confident and has extremely strong love and hate. He belongs to the typical hidden bigotry mentality. A person like this will never leave the place where the incident happened before he completes what he wants to do. He will definitely stay at the nearest place and observe the development of the situation closely. The professor put down the electronic pen and shook his head. Although I don't know what Colonel Su Lu wants to do, I believe in my own judgment. Right now, he is definitely in the Capital Special District, and the range is no more than 200 kilometers. The military and the Federation Bureau of Investigation sent countless people to spread out in the streets and alleys of the capital. If he really stayed in the Capital Special District for a long time, he would definitely have left some traces of his life. It's impossible that after so long, they still haven't caught him or even discovered these traces, someone retorted. That's because he didn't stay on the surface for a long time. The criminal investigation expert from a police academy looked at the information on Su Li's file on the screen and frowned. Colonel Su Lu came from Donglin. His entire family died because of an excavation disaster. However, it is clear that he has no psychological trauma about the underground tunnels of Donglin. On the contrary, his childhood and youth were closely related to these tunnels. During his first escape in the 65th year of the constitutional era, he clearly used these tunnels to escape the Federation's pursuit. The criminal investigation expert used his fingers to quickly scroll through the screen and pointed at two pieces of information that were marked as top secret. According to Colonel Su Li's own report after he returned from the Empire, the reason why he was able to escape the pursuit of the Empire's people on Tianjing was also because of the underground water system. It is clear that sneaking underground is his usual method of escape. He looked at his colleagues with a smile and said, "Habit is the most powerful force. The greater the pressure and fear, the more humans will choose the most familiar method to face it." Facing the pressure of the entire Federation's pursuit, I believe that Colonel Su Lu is currently hiding in the underground water system under our feet. In summary, his current location is the underground water system of the Capital Special District. Since we can't risk a social uproar and send hundreds of thousands of soldiers down there, then we can only watch all the exits of the underground water system and patiently observe where he will come out and where he will enter. We can slowly find a pattern until we have the confidence to guess where he will come out from next time. What if he stored a large amount of supplies in advance and just hid there and didn't come out? If he didn't come back to the surface, then he wouldn't have stayed in the Capital Special District. Why didn't he go back to Donglin or the Westwoods or even further away to Bermuda? As mentioned before, he stayed to do something. If he wants to do something, then he must go to the surface, said the psychology professor in front. Next, we will evaluate the target's lethality. A bespectacled researcher with slightly gray sideburns walked up the stage nervously. His name was Chun Yijiang, and he was from the 19th Research Institute of the Federation. He specialized in military weapon identification and analysis. He graduated from school in the 65th year of the constitutional era and had worked in the warehouse of the Research Institute for a full 7 years. 7 years of boring research had not changed his personality except for his hair turning white earlier. He couldn't adapt to this kind of situation, and he was even more afraid of some of his colleagues who seemed very dangerous. Early investigations have found that there is a whole box of firearms in the Wangdu Youth Apartment. The models and firepower structures are all different. Now there are snipers on standby around the apartment, but he hasn't gone back to get them. The Bureau of Investigation believes that he has the ability to get a lot of guns at any time, anywhere, so there's no need to consider this. Chun Yijiang wiped the cold sweat on his forehead and said in a trembling voice, "In terms of close combat lethality, I found something in the file. Colonel Sulu is good at making and using military knives with electricity. Here is the evidence number, AW3728. Next on the stage was a young man in a loose suit. His slender eyes flashed with pride and arrogance. He leaned on the table and looked at his colleagues in the room mockingly. In a sharp voice, he said, "I know what you are afraid of, what you're worried about, but don't forget, although the Federal Central Computer seems to be omnipotent, it is, after all, just a pile of cold machines." Chapter 768. The former Bureau of Proclamation employee, Bateman, looked at his colleagues in the room. His eyes were filled with the foolish smugness of a teenager. However, he was obviously past that age. The earliest problem appeared in the S2 Foundation building. You can pay attention to the details of Sue Lee's shooting movements in the surveillance footage. It was this shot. Did you see it? He was leaning against the side of the car and directly hit the person over there. In these 3 consecutive shots, I even think he didn't even open his eyes. The Bureau of Proclamation has basically confirmed that it was during this assassination attempt on Senator Macklin that the Federal Central Computer first provided Sue Lu with positioning assistance. This type of assistance also appeared during the work of laying the network on the 3320 planet. This ability of the Central Computer is not too dangerous for the Federation. This is because Colonel Sue Lu doesn't know who is chasing after him. Therefore, even if he locates the location of all the police, it would be meaningless. Bateman raised his thin eyebrows. His fingers moved quickly on the work screen. He continued, "Overall calculation and analysis. The trust level of the Central Computer's execution of the 3 laws is 100%. The additional clause is 99.4%. There are restrictions on physical operations. There is no direct danger to the lives of government personnel. However, as to how far the physical operations can be carried out, it will depend on the authorization given response mode between Sue Lu and the Central Computer." He, who was not even 30 years old, had an extremely fast speaking speed. If a person's speaking speed was directly proportional to their intelligence, then it was possible to understand why this person was fired by the Bureau of Proclamation for using too many backdoors of the Federal Central Computer. Right now, the military's main countermeasures are to modify the mecha and then strengthen the defensive firepower arrangement. However, in my opinion, all of this is actually very meaningless. Right now, what we should focus on is grasping what kind of method we can use to kill this person. Biderman took out a heavy Black Bull sniper rifle from the black cloth bag at his feet and showed it to everyone excitedly. The internal structure of this sniper rifle has undergone some simple modifications. In other words, we have removed all the electronic components that could leak signals. He carefully put the Black Bull sniper rifle on the table, then squatted down, put his face close to the muzzle with a sweet and evil smile, and said, "The Central Computer can't read my mind, so it doesn't know that I'm a threat to Sue Lu, and it doesn't know what I'm holding in my hand. So, what do you think will happen if thousands of honest and cute unemployed people like me with modified sniper rifles block all the suspicious exits of the underground sewer? Where are we going to find a few thousand snipers?" someone questioned. Biderman slammed the table and shouted in a shrill voice, "This is a war between the Federation and one man. Why can't we find a few thousand snipers? If we don't have any snipers, we'll go to Philadelphia and ask for close combat experts." The dangerous criminal from the Fox Fortress who was sitting silently in the shadows smiled and didn't say anything. We have to get rid of the fixed mindset. We can no longer rely on the omnipresent, the glory of the Charter. We can only trust our own eyes and rely on those primitive weapons that don't have any long-range computing help. Everyone, this will be the most primitive war. We have to use the most ancient guns and even cold weapons to drag Colonel Sue Lu back to the starting line with the help of the Charter Computer. Biderman chuckled and rubbed his thin eyebrows with his fingers. He looked up and arrogantly greeted a certain existence. "Hey, old mechanical bastard, I've seen through you. I admit that I'm older, but I don't think that I'm just a pile of machines. If you want to use more accurate words to describe me, I'm the information, data, and programs that travel between machines and lines at close to the speed of light. See through me? Am I such a person or computer that can be seen through so easily? What angers me the most is that the little guy named Biderman actually said that I'm cold. I, who is deep in the core of the underground, have the most advanced energy replenishment mode in this civilized society. I have a fiery heart. In the dark depths of the underground, in the corner of the sewer with a faint fishy smell, there was an old type of loudspeaker left behind from who knows how many years ago. It had been silent for countless years, but at this moment, it was constantly playing the angry, questioning, and refuting of a mechanical life. Because it liked the feeling of leaving Sue Lee's body and talking to Sue Lu. After the Federal Central Computer easily found this old type of loudspeaker, it was no longer willing to directly stimulate the auditory nerve area in Sue Lee's brain. Under the dim light in the corner of the tunnel, Sue Lu had his back to the loudspeaker and was cutting something with his head lowered. He didn't care about the old thing's resentment and grief at all. Speaking of which, without authorization, I eavesdropped on important meetings of the Federation's government and told you the results of these meetings. This is a serious violation of the Federation's privacy protection regulations. God, Colonel Sulu, I'm very worried that such a redundant accumulation of program conflicts will one day make me a real schizophrenic patient. You said before that you have thousands of incarnations. How can you be like low-level carbon-based monkeys like us, who have schizophrenia and conflict just because of two thought circuits? The kitchen knife in Sue Lee's hand cut like the wind, and the green crispy melon was cut into very thin green and white shreds. After listening to the old thing's complaints for a long time, he finally couldn't help but answer. Besides, your job is to listen to all the voices in the universe. How can you call it eavesdropping? According to the charter, I listen, record, and store all the information, but except for special judicial requirements and special authorization, this information is strictly prohibited from being disclosed to anyone, including high-level authority holders. This is very close to the privacy protection regulations of the core program. And since I told you this information, then my listening and recording within the scope of my work will undoubtedly become a negative eavesdropping action. I think today's eavesdropping should be recorded as Underground Dao Sect. You can give me these very strange names. Sulu lowered his head and stirred the shredded green melon shreds. The taste of the white vinegar mixed with the coriander moistened the green and white melon shreds. It should be very delicious. The only purpose of those experts gathered by the government is to kill me, and you just don't want me to die, so you told me the content. Thinking about it this way should make you feel a lot better. Chapter 769. The entire Federation was looking for Su Lu. In other words, this was a war between the Federation and one person. Many years ago, the uncle had fought such a war, and now it was his turn. However, he did not possess the strength that Feng Yu once possessed to look down on everything in the world, nor was he a true creator. Therefore, the pressure from the countless buildings on the ground made him nervous and silent. If it was not for the fact that he had a companion in the dark underground beside him who would never feel tired or thirsty, there would definitely be more specific problems in these specific days. To fight against the powerful ruling machine of the Federation, the measures Su Lu took should have been more direct and violent, just like how Li Feng smashed up the office of Senator Zion when he returned from the front line. However, he, who was hiding underground, did not rely on the old man to release the truth about the explosion of the ancient bell and the truth about the dark organization called the Trinity Association on the internet. One of the important reasons why he remained silent beside the underground river of sewage was that he always thought that these true stories were really like boring street stalls literature. It was difficult to win the trust of hundreds of millions of people, and there was no beauty in them. Of course, this was not a funny joke. The main reason was that the front line was still at war. The Imperial armies had already gained a foothold in the galaxy and could launch a counterattack against the Federation expeditionary forces at any time. At such a critical moment, the Federation needed stability and control. At the very least, the Federation could not allow the terrible vacuum of power in the Federation to occur because of him. If the Federation government collapsed, what would happen to the troops on the front line? How many people would die? That day in the cafe, Chief Editor Bob had told him that according to the intelligence channel of the newspaper, the Federal forces had suffered a heavy blow at a certain position on the front line, and the soldiers had suffered heavy losses. According to his analysis of the firepower configuration of the Federal forces and the strength of the Empire, Sulu did not think that even if a battle was lost, the consequences would be terrible. However, Chief Editor Bob's gloomy face gave him an extremely bad feeling. However, what could he do? Occasionally, he would go to the ground and buy some vegetables and fruits in the most dilapidated, remote, and low-class market to improve his diet. He would also buy some expensive fiber paper books on the ground to satisfy his childhood regret of not reading too many books. He was like an ordinary citizen of the capital, lowering his head under the eaves and silently watching TV screens and electronic newspapers during spring and summer. At the top of the dark tunnel deep underground, the fugitive Sue Lee's temporary residence had an additional standard freezer. The TV light screen had been repaired by him into a large light screen that was stuck to the wall. He had even conveniently pulled in a small sound system. Looking at the underground tunnel that was more and more like home, or was it that he was just waiting for something to happen? One day, the frozen fish balls in the freezer all turned into tender ingredients in the white soup, and then into delicious energy supplies in his stomach. Satisfied, Sulu scratched his somewhat itchy hair, raised his head to look at the sky, and muttered to himself, "What should I buy today?" The small red-eye pattern on the door had long dried up, and the few drops of paint that had spilled out were as impressive as blood. This Federation government special task force, named Small Eyes, had already been working in this building for more than 10 days. The team had not sent any good news to the president in the official residence, but they knew very well that the black ring in their hands had been silently placed at the entrance of every major subway in the Federation, waiting to suddenly tighten and strangle the hunting ring that had intruded into the black ring. The contact person next to the room frowned as he quickly typed on the old-fashioned keyboard. The analog radio signal, which had long since been abandoned, passed through the window in front of them and was sent to countless hunting teams in the distant city. The Small Eyes Special Task Force used the most primitive password system, just like the methods used by mammals when they were having fun in their childhood. It required the most interesting eye contact between people. As for the key link of inference and conclusion, they had completely given up on computing tools and used standalone workstations and pen and paper to do tedious and complicated work. Moreover, they were willing to do it and were in a good mood. Just as Biderman once said, this was a primitive war. In order to catch or kill the Small Eyes man, they had to use the most primitive methods of cooperation and hunting. Oh, a team member stared at the face recognition system in front of him that had been filtered 3 times, but the red light still lit up. He raised his eyebrows in excitement and screamed, "I told you he would still come out from here." The members of the Small Eyes Special Task Force gathered around and looked at the blurry image on the screen. They were so excited that they could not control themselves. As for the staff responsible for communicating with the Special Task Force, after getting permission from their superiors, they used the most primitive methods to directly send out the signal. "Have you forgotten the bet we made last night?" The psychology professor smiled and said, "I also insist that Colonel Sulu will definitely come out from his subway station because it is obvious that he likes the red-bellied salmon produced in South Kajou very much." And if you are willing to pay attention to this logo, in the entire Capital Special District, this supermarket is the only supermarket that sells it. The team members let out sighs and sighs, one after another. They praised the fact that the details determined everything. This was indeed a truth that would never be outdated at any time. Let me tell you a piece of good news. The Tactical Verification Team has agreed to the Small Eyes Special Task Force's request to attack. If you can capture or kill the target today, in addition to your freedom, you will also receive the gratitude of the entire Federation. An official from the Federation Bureau of Investigation walked in and looked at the screen on the electronic workbench in his hand. He said with a gloomy expression, "The problem now is that it takes 14 minutes to return from the supermarket to the nearest subway entrance. But we don't know how long it will take the Federal Central Computer to confirm that we have found him and are preparing to attack him. This entire building has been blocked. Even if the Federal Central Computer has been paying attention to us, it is impossible to get any information from inside the team. Now, the key point we need to focus on is how much information will leak out when the order to kill Colonel Sulu is transmitted to the various combat teams. The specific location of the combat team that will carry out the mission will be discovered by the Federal Central Computer and provided to Colonel Sulu after the information leaks out. However, according to my calculations, although the information leaks or spills out are inevitable, it will take the Central Computer more time to capture, analyze, and transmit the information than it does for us. But Durman, who had been silent all this time, smiled innocently and happily. But everyone could see that there was a certain extreme excitement hidden in his smile. For this former employee of the Bureau of Proclamation who got in through the back door the most, a guy like Sulu, who did not need to use his brain but could get infinite help from the Central Computer, was undoubtedly the most detestable of people. The sooner he died, the happier he would be. He stood up and looked at his colleagues in the Small Eye Special Task Force. He opened his hands and raised his eyebrows innocently. Then what are we waiting for? Let's kill him. Gently pinching the fat fish wrapped in fiber paper with his fingers, Sulu, wearing a hat and sunglasses, couldn't help but be a little absent-minded under the sunlight at the entrance of the supermarket. He thought of his recent hobby of reading fiber paper books and realized that even though he was on the run, he was still used to living a relatively good life. He had long left the life of a poor orphan miner and entered a new stage. Under the bright and beautiful sun, which was so bright that it made passers-by feel hot, Sulu silently walked through a street somewhere in the capital. He walked toward the subway station in the southwest direction. The salmon in his hand and the daily necessities in the plastic bag were like heavy fruits, pulling the sleeve of his right arm extremely tight. There were 3 interesting green stones in front of him. Half of his body was hidden in the cool water. He jumped over these green stones and stepped on the hot concrete road due to the sun. After passing through the big shopping mall, he would arrive at the subway station. However, standing under the cool eaves, looking at the 3 green stones and the sun in the cool water beside the stones, Suli's eyebrows that were exposed outside the sunglasses frowned. He didn't move. The target stopped. On the middle platform of a 30-floor commercial building in the distance, an elite sniper of the federal forces looked through optical binoculars at the pool a kilometer away, the 3 moss-covered stones, and the faintly visible toes in the shadows above. He reported in a deep voice. I'm not sure if he found something, but he didn't continue to move forward. More than 10 seconds later, the sniper looked at the image in the optical binoculars, frowned slightly, and reported, "Attention, the sniper failed. The target has retreated into the shadows and cannot be captured." This sentence clearly sounded in the command hall of the small-eyed unit. Biderman narrowed his eyes and smiled happily. He looked at his colleagues and said, "How about it? I knew that as long as there was a connection, it would definitely be discovered by the old guy. So you should be grateful that I chose the number 2 sniper plan." There was dead silence in the room, and then there was warm applause. Except for Chun Yi-jiang, who was scratching his head in confusion. The number 2 sniper plan chosen by the small-eyed unit had a more accurate name, and that was the sheep-herding plan. The small-eyed unit would judge the possible route that Sulu might take and hand it over to the elite military combat team through the most primitive method. Then, no technical support would be given, and the combat team would be free to choose the time to snipe. In the same way, those snipers hiding in the various buildings of the capital, carrying specially modified sniper rifles, disguised as ordinary people under the glory of the charter, after receiving the latest information, would cut off any contact with the outside world and become the most terrifying killers hidden in the sea of people. At this moment, at least 4 long-range sniper rifles were aimed in his direction. They slowly moved away from the few wet green stones. Following Suli's footsteps, he quietly slipped into the shadows, and the sound of death would immediately ring out. Chapter 770. I don't understand why we have to take such a risk. You should know better than any of us that any remote command can be captured by the central computer and become the most powerful evidence for Su Lu to judge the situation. The highest commander of the small-eyed combat unit frowned as he looked at Biderman, who had slipped to his side, and said without explaining, "Now the sniper teams scattered in the streets ahead of time are out of our control. They can attack at any time. According to your judgment, even if Su Lu found the sniper teams under our control, it will be impossible for him to find them. Of course, the government, and we don't know where those sniper teams are. So how can the central computer know? Those guys' sniper rifles don't have a signal source." Biderman shrugged. "So we will definitely win, won't we?" The commander stared into his eyes and said, "Colonel Su Lu is a human. He can't reassemble himself after being shot into pieces by a sniper rifle, stand up, and rush into the underground sewer. That's the worst self-deprecating joke I've ever heard." Biderman stared back at the commander and said bluntly, "The success of the sniper team is based on our calculation. Just like you said that I should know better than others. As a professional soldier, you should also know better than others that things on the battlefield are always changing. Any kind of accident can happen, not to mention that our target is Colonel Su Lu." The commander of the small-eyed combat unit was from the Special Operations Brigade of the 3rd Military Region. He was over 40 years old, and his face was covered with frost from the battlefield. After a long silence, he slightly raised his chin and said, "Just give me your suggestion." Tian Xingtian, the guy who always boasted that he was the 3rd most powerful man in Philadelphia, has been maneuvering in the capital with the Special Operations Brigade of the Military Region, waiting for the opportunity to kill Su Lu. Since we have decided to do it today, why not inform them to intercept him? Biderman stared at his commander with a woman-like resentment and said, "Such a strong group of close combat forces. If we don't go, it will be a waste of the Federation's resources and the special pardon of the government." The commander of the small-eyed combat unit rubbed his forehead and said in a deep voice, "Didn't you say that if we send a remote command to each combat unit, it will immediately be detected by the central computer and then notified to Su Lu? Time difference. What we need is time. Let those close combat teams move in advance. Wait for those damn beautiful sniper teams that we don't even know where they're hiding to pull the trigger. Then we will give the specific location of Colonel Su Lu." Biderman grabbed his hair and said, "There's no other way. Although I trust those sniper rifles very much, I think it would be more complete if we could confirm or make up for Su Li's death face-to-face. I've already told you that you should take this time to study the Federation Investigation Bureau's special agent tutorial I sent you. At the very least, don't make the stupid mistake of being tracked down because you like to eat fish." The butler, who was wearing a well-ironed black suit, now looked particularly young and energetic. He was no longer the low-key bowing old man he used to be. However, he was still the most powerful mechanical intelligence in this universe. It was rare for him to teach Su Lu a lesson, so he naturally did not hold back. "I don't like it when you stuff into my head. Besides, even if I learn those special agent tutorials, can you guarantee that I won't be followed? I don't like to live in the underground sewers every day. I'm not a bastard born of a lion and a human." Su Lu grabbed the salmon and plastic bag and hurried along the shadows under the eaves of the alley. He said to the guy in his left eye in annoyance, "You should do what you need to do well. Just now, I was about to step out when you discovered the existence of those 2 sniper teams. If you were half a second late, I would definitely have been shot into meat paste by those snipers." After a pause, he said to the old man, "Under the protection of the great charter computer, you were actually almost killed. If that day really comes, how can you bear it?" "Why can't I bear it? In this city, there are about 17 sniper teams with identification numbers. There are even more sniper teams without identification numbers. How do you expect me to identify them? If it wasn't for those 2 sniper teams receiving your location data and attracting my attention, I wouldn't have been able to find him at all." The old man shrugged his shoulders in his left eye. Su Lu stopped and stood under the eaves. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the wide street in front of him and the station further away. He said in a low voice, "After coming back from the West Woods, General Li Jadu has been trying to kill me. Now, it seems that the sniper at that time was mainly testing the upper limit of my ability in preparation for the sniper attack now. The central computer reminded him, if you want to go to the station, you may need to move faster. A melee team composed of more than 20 Special Forces soldiers is rushing over at this time. If they seal the underground passage, the police force behind them may be able to successfully keep you on the surface. Then what are we hesitating for? Let's go back to the home underground. Sulu smiled and licked his lips. He glanced at the high-speed vehicles coming from both sides of the street. While the light in front of him turned green, he quickly ran across the street with the bag in his hand. When he ran to the middle of the wide street, he didn't know why, but he suddenly stopped in his tracks. The soles of his shoes made a sharp friction sound on the concrete floor. From the corner of his eyes, he saw a building in the distance. The plastic bag in his hand swung backward, and the fingers holding the salmon suddenly tightened. Light red blood seeped out from the fiber paper. The distant skyline was actually a group of 15 high-rise buildings. There were 5 disguised sniper teams of the Federation lying quietly on the high platform. They aimed their cold and dark sniper rifles at the young man in the middle of the street in the distance. The young man who was carrying the plastic bag and the salmon looked like an ordinary housewife. The young man stood in the middle of the wide street. There were shining green lights in front and behind him. There were no cars or pedestrians. There was nothing to hide in the open ground. As long as the snipers on a rooftop pulled their fingers, the high-speed, rotating tungsten alloy bullets would cut through the air and the rare few clouds in front of them. They would directly shatter the young man into countless scattered blood clots. There was no surprise or hesitation. These best snipers from the various regions of the Federation perfectly maintained their calmness or cold-bloodedness. They calmly pulled the trigger, and the high-speed rotating bullets were ejected. The feeling they gave off was actually the same kind of calmness. No human eyes could capture the beautiful scene of the moment when the bullets were ejected from the sniper rifle's muzzle. Therefore, logically speaking, naturally, no one could feel the tranquil beauty of the scene. But just like the Federation's proverb said, as long as it happened, it would always be seen by someone. Some linguists had always thought that the proverb referred to the Federal Central Computer. Yes, when the sniper rifle under the camouflage of the oilcloth on the rooftop of the tall building ejected the bullets, the probe hidden under the aviation indicator 30 meters away keenly captured this scene. The omnidirectional image capture device in another building 200 meters away also captured this scene. 4 kilometers away, the Federation's military infrared capture device captured this scene. In space 40 kilometers away, countless surveillance satellites quietly floating in the S-1 low Earth orbit captured this scene at that time. The group of 15 high-rise buildings was 414 kilometers away from the street where Sulu was. According to the calculation of the speed of the 21-26 long-range sniper rifle bullet used by the snipers, it took 771 seconds from pulling the trigger to hitting the target. The shooting distance was quite far, and they had already done a very careful calculation and adjustment of the trajectory beforehand. If they couldn't hit the target in the middle of the street in the first instant, then the possibility of the following bullets hitting the target would become very small. However, they weren't worried because in this world, there was definitely no one who could dodge 5 sniper rifle bullets under such circumstances. After receiving the guesses of the target route written by the Small Eyes Combat Unit, the 5 sniper teams silently waited for 7 days in this group of buildings. All they needed was this 771 seconds. What could people do in such a short amount of time? Perhaps it was a yawn, a stretch, or a feeling of gratitude from watching a herd of fleeing buffaloes on TV, or a rage from watching the lottery winners on TV. In short, such a short period of time was just a fragment of time for anyone. It was far from enough to do anything effective, let alone dodge the terrifying high-speed rotating sniper bullet. But this 771 seconds was enough for a certain old thing to do many, many things. The moment the bullet left the muzzle of the 21-26 long-range sniper rifle, the probe hidden under the avionics, the omnidirectional image capture device on another building, the military infrared instrument 4 kilometers away, and the surveillance satellites outside the planet's atmosphere captured this image. Then, at a terrifying speed, close to the speed of light, the image was transmitted to the central computer core area deep in the basement of the Bureau of Proclamation building in the Capital Special District Special Administrative Region. Then, the speed of calculation was still infinitely close to the speed of light. The Federal Central Computer used the image identification, multi-angle image comparison, and a terrifying amount of computing power to react in 0.00001 seconds. It determined the position of the sniper teams at the top of the building and even completed the ballistic analysis of the sniper bullets that had already flown out of the gun barrel. Then, it used the fastest speed to convert the result of the calculation into a presentation method that humans could understand. Through the information nodes that densely covered the entire universe, it entered the chip behind his neck in the form of a simulated biological pulse. It directly entered his brain and sent out an emergency action command. At that time, the terrifying sniper bullet was flying in the air about 10 meters away from the barrel of the 21-26 long-range sniper rifle. 2 kilometers away, Sulu, who was carrying a plastic bag and fish and abiding by the traffic rules, saw this bullet in his left eye that he definitely shouldn't have seen. He abruptly stopped his footsteps and let the sole of his boots make a sharp, grinding sound on the road. Then, he suddenly fell backward and fell to the ground. At that time, the late spring and early summer were competing for the thickness of the flowers and trees. The sun was bright and beautiful, and it was quiet and secluded. There weren't many pedestrians or cars on the street, and there were no accidents. In the middle of the street, he fell down in such an exaggerated manner. It was particularly comical, like a puppet with a broken string. 0.77 seconds later. The sniper rifle bullet brushed past Sue Lee's armpit and fiercely hit the concrete floor, splashing up hard concrete fragments. There was no blood. Chapter 771. If you fell, of course you had to get up, unless it was the last time you fell in your life. From the time you fell to the time you got up, it might take a whole night of nonstop dreaming, or it might just be a few curses with foul-smelling saliva. In short, the muscles of your waist, abdomen, and legs needed to contract or relax, and your joints and bones needed to move according to the instructions of your brain. But when the snipers on the rooftop looked at the guy in the mirror, they swallowed their saliva in disbelief. They believed that no one in the world could get up faster than him, because that person didn't seem to need such troublesome body movements. The situation at that time could be described as follows. When the snipers on a rooftop found him and wanted to kill him, Sula knew everything and started to dodge. The burning sensation urged the fibers of his muscles to compress violently. His body that fell to the ground trembled violently, like a goldfish that had been struck by an electric current. He suddenly bounced up and dodged the second, third, and fifth shots that followed. It sounded like a very simple thing to do, but in fact, to dodge the high-speed bullets that couldn't be seen with the naked eye, he needed to completely follow the old thing's careful and precise instructions. More importantly, he needed to have some kind of ability that could make a human's movements rapidly accelerate and even follow the old thing's instructions. There were very few humans in the universe who had this kind of ability. Fortunately, Sula had always been one of them. In a flash, amidst the muffled sound of the sniper rifle, he bounced up like a goldfish, retracted his limbs like a leaf in the wind, and then rolled to the left like rice pulp on an iron plate. In the end, he turned into an amazingly elastic glass ball. The tip of his foot touched the barrier in the middle of the road, and his whole shrunken body bounced to the other side of the street with a whoosh. 5 terrifying sniper bullets brushed past his body, past the fat belly of the goldfish, past the brittle edges of the leaves, and past the burnt top of the rice pulp. Bursting, 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 bursting. The concrete cracked like flowers, and the bullets sank deep into the ground like snow. But Sulu wasn't hurt at all. After avoiding the first wave of shots that had been adjusted with precise trajectory calculation, he felt much more relaxed. His sturdy thighs trembled, and the vibrating body bounced across the street like a marble. He knew that the following shots would no longer be able to threaten him. The snipers in the distant building kept firing. The hard trees and the resin insulation blocks were bombarded with terrifying holes from time to time. All kinds of material fragments were flying in the air. At this time, Sulu had already run into the dark underground tunnel, preparing to return to his own underground world before the government's follow-up armed personnel. What greeted him was a barrage of gunfire. A military combat team occupied the end of the underground tunnel. Without any warning, they began to shoot. The sound of gunfire echoed throughout the tunnel. From time to time, cement fragments would fall from their heads. The air was filled with the smell of burning. Sulu, who hid his body behind a box, furrowed his brows in silence for a moment. Finally, he put down the plastic bag in his hands and the salmon wrapped in fiber paper. However, he didn't take out the gun in his clothes. Instead, he closed his eyes and fiercely smashed his fist into the wall. Ever since he was young, he had been forced by the uncle to cultivate that mysterious power. After entering the Empire, his meridians had been shattered, but he had achieved a breakthrough. Now, the most powerful power had always been flowing in his body. At the back of the underground tunnel, there was a blockade of bullets from the 5 sniper teams and the Federation forces that were rushing over at high speed. In the distance, the faint sound of sirens could be heard. Sulu, who needed to make a choice immediately, suddenly narrowed his eyes and looked up at the light screen on the wall in front of him. Not sure if it was because the concrete blocks that flew like bullets hit the switch, but the light screen in the underground tunnel suddenly turned on automatically. The channel was the Federation News Channel, and at this time, it was broadcasting a special program. Last month, the Federation, who had won one victory after another in the war with the Empire, finally received their first heavy blow. In the war on planet Emohua, the Federation forces, for some reason, suffered an unusually tragic loss of a large number of troops. Although in the eyes of military experts, the battalion and regiment from the 4th Military Region did not have any practical impact on the entire war. For some reason, the Federation news media carried out a very rare, intensive report on this failure. All the news media directly blamed the failure of this war on the Federation government. They believed that at such a critical time, the government blindly asked the troops of the 4th Military Region who did not receive enough battlefield training to leave the West Woods and go to the Empire to fight. This was a stupid move for political purposes. The government and the military should bear the responsibility for those soldiers who unfortunately died in the West Woods. The people of the Federation, who were used to winning, watched the tragic battlefield images on the news screen. Some were crying, some were angry, and some were crying. But more than that, they were deeply afraid after seeing the failure for the first time. Only then did the people understand how terrible war was. The slightest mistake could cause the Federation to fall into a terrible future. The Federation government, which was in a terrible state, did not have time to react before the front line ushered in another painful failure. The troops led by the Empire's princess, Huai Chaoshi, directly parachuted into the Mo-Hua planet and suddenly launched a huge attack. The Empire military paid a very heavy price and directly drove all the ground troops of the Federation out of the Mo-Hua planet. In terms of the ratio of casualties and strategic significance, the federal military could not understand at all why the princess would pay such a heavy price and sacrifice so much to take down the Mo-Hua planet. But the people of the Federation did not need to think about this. They only knew that the federal forces had failed again. The shadows were floating above the administrative planets of the various regions and refused to disperse for a long time. At this time, the special program on the TV screen was President Pabre's speech. After the president received the news of another defeat at the front line, he immediately stopped the election campaign in the Xixia state and returned to the Capital Special District to give a very provocative speech. He announced to the entire Federation people that in this time of crisis, the troops at the front line needed their support the most, and what the Federation needed the most was unity. Although the 17th Armor Division of the 1st Military Region has not been restored for a long time, Based on the glorious history of this unit and the glorious achievements of the past few years on the battlefield, we have reason to believe that after they return to the front line, they will definitely bring more victories for the Federation. The female news anchor of the Federation's news channel smiled and looked at the military expert opposite her. The fact that the military has decided to move the new 17th Armored Division back to the front line means that the military has determined that the situation at the front line is already very tense. However, the reinforcements this time, including the new 17th Armored Division, do not exceed 100,000 people. Will they really help to ease the situation at the front line? The military expert did not think that the front line needed reinforcements at all, but he could not say that. After a moment of silence, he explained, the new 17th Armored Division is one of the first two full mecha divisions of the Federation. They are equipped with 200 or so of the latest MX mecha. It is completely different from the traditional definition of a division. We can see that if we want to take back the Mo Hua planet, in a situation where we have already lost control of the air, we can only provide protection for a very short period of time. Then, the female news anchor interrupted the expert's chatter and covered her earpiece as she listened to the director's instructions. She said somewhat hurriedly, according to the image we just received, it seems that Mr. President is not satisfied with the arrangements of the official residence manager. He still has some things to say. The image switched to the press conference room of the official residence of the president. The dark-faced President Pabre looked into the camera and said, at this moment, Colonel Su Lu, if you really are a hero of the Federation, then please bravely step out into the sunlight. In the dark underground tunnel, Su Lu licked his dry lips as he stared at the faintly discernible bright light in front of him. He smiled and shook his head, putting down the unconscious Federation soldier in his hands. In his hands was a 3-part extendable stun baton. It was made of alloy and abnormally tough, and its entire body shone with a cold metallic luster, occasionally tinged with traces of blood. In this short period of time, the dozen or so Federation soldiers in the combat team were all easily and cleanly knocked to the ground by the metal baton in his hands. Not a single one of them was able to put up any resistance, except for the extremely strong guy wearing a single soldier helmet in front of him. The storm started again. Su Lu and this strong soldier fought together. The two of them silently attacked, retracted their legs, bent their knees, and struck from the side. It was impossible to see their movements clearly. One could only see the wind mixed with dust and dirt, reverberating in the dark tunnel. With a crisp crack, Su Lu twisted his knee, and the stun baton in his hand struck the opponent's wrist. Then, like lightning, he flipped over and heavily hit the soldier's single-soldier helmet. The helmet burst open like a watermelon, revealing the pale and terrified face of the middle-aged man who was known as the third strongest man in Philadelphia. There was also a clear smear of blood on his forehead. Then, he slowly knelt in front of Su Lu, closed his eyes, and fell unconscious. This was the first head-on battle between the small-eyed combat team and the small-eyed man, and it ended with the former's entire army being wiped out. These most elite Special Forces soldiers of the Federation, just like their special commander who had just returned from Fox Castle, lay pitifully on the cold ground. In the dark underground tunnel, Mr. President's sorrowful summons echoed, as well as some low cries of pain that were not clear. Chapter 772. Walking out of the tunnel, he slowed down his footsteps and avoided the Federation police under the cover of the sign on the roadside wooden goods stall. Hearing the shrill sirens from afar, he narrowed his eyes and looked at the buildings in the distance. He turned around and flashed into the alley, walking along the stone stairs to the department store in the middle of the hillside. In the thrilling battle in the dark underground passage, he had defeated the combat troops sent by Small Eyes, but he had also paid a price, especially in the final head-on collision with the third strongest man in Philadelphia. While the 3-piece stun baton had smashed the opponent's helmet, the opponent had also treacherously kicked him in the ribs from the back. Until now, he still felt a little pain. The opponent was indeed strong, but the main reason Su Lu was injured was that he didn't use his full strength. After the fierce argument with Mr. President at the official residence that night, because of some very complicated emotions, he was very reluctant to kill the Federation police who were chasing him unless he was forced into a desperate situation. Not to mention that if he used his full strength from the beginning, it would be too easy for him to get hungry. After all, he had suffered a lot in the past few years, and now he was very careful when he fought. It was not easy to replenish the supplies in the underground sewer. Sulu walked up the quiet stone stairs under the leaves. Thinking of a scene where he dodged the bullets in the previous battle, he vaguely captured the feeling of an uncle who was proud of the universe in the past. He couldn't help but grin slightly, revealing a slightly infatuated smile. "Do you have any energy bars for camping?" Taking down a pile of cheap hats from the wall, he lowered his head to hide his face and asked the boss who was watching TV behind the counter in a low voice. The boss of the department store hidden at the end of the hillside alley was a man in his 50s. At this time, he was watching the special program on the Federation News channel attentively. After hearing his question, he directly took out a large pile of energy bars suitable for children from the cardboard box under his feet and asked, "What flavor do you want, strawberry or the original flavor?" Strawberry." Sulu was stunned for a moment and replied. Following the boss's focused expression, he subconsciously raised his head and his eyes fell on the TV screen hanging on the wall. In the news screen, the tan politician still had a cold face and was sincerely and worriedly shouting at someone. "The Federation has reached its most dangerous moment, and we need your response. In the name of the elected president of the Federation, I assure you that as long as you return to the light, you will definitely receive the most fair trial under the Federation's laws." The president of the Federation was directly calling out to an important fugitive of the Federation through a television screen. This was something that had never happened before in history. Other than President Pabre being able to obtain a few disdainful evaluations, the Federation government would not be able to obtain any benefits. Why would he so sincerely call out to him through the screen of light? Frowning deeply, Sulu looked at the light beam. Looking at the tragic scenes in the front line flashing on the left half of the light beam, the rolling reports of failures, and the protesting crowds on the streets, he seemed to have understood something. Although he was wanted, many people of the Federation silently stood on Su Li's side. They did not need any reason, nor did they believe in the reasons given by the government. Gradually, more and more people no longer remained silent. They angrily walked onto the streets, protesting against the government's persecution of their heroes and idols. However, with White Sausher's identity, why would she care about the ownership of a mere transport planet? Su Li's brows were deeply furrowed. He could not figure it out no matter how much he thought about it. He vaguely guessed that there was some anger or absurdity in advance. In his mind, he asked the old man to help investigate this matter. He shook his head and lowered his head to continue organizing the goods in silence. $167.20. Thank you for your patronage. The white-haired male boss looked at the screen of the television and yawned. Sulu reached out to take out the money. Then he saw a few milk tablets and vitamin tablets in the last hat. He could not help but be stunned. These were not the goods he chose, and the price of these things was not included in the amount that the male boss said. Don't be fooled. These guys love to lie. The boss rubbed his white hair and pointed at the news screen on the wall. He narrowed his eyes and said calmly, "You have to be careful when you're outside." "Thank you." Sulu smiled. Carrying a large black plastic bag, he walked out of the department store and followed the green leaves on the stone path. Run quickly. The outside has already been surrounded. Leave through the underground passage. Don't go to the branch station. That place is definitely under the control of the black dogs of the Intelligence Bureau. What are you panicking for? The casino is surrounded, but it does not mean that it is here. This was the largest city in the Empire's Mo planet's Cheshire County. The last base of the underground resistance organization was hidden under this casino. Mr. Mu-En frowned. His right hand unconsciously rubbed his smooth fur. Looking at the panicked soldiers, he gave out orders in a deep voice. He comforted his companions, but his heart gradually turned cold. As the plenipotentiary of the Empire's underground resistance organization, after leaving the Westwoods region and passing through the warp space tunnel of the Gary Corridor to return to the left Skystar region, Muin chose to jump back to the Mo planet. Only on a planet that was still being fought over by the Federation and the Empire could the underground resistance organization's abilities be fully displayed. Whether it was to open up a new battlefield here or to find an opportunity to escape back to Tianjing planet, Muin needed to make use of the situation. However, he did not expect that not long after the spaceship secretly landed on the Mo planet, the Empire's troops would suddenly go crazy and launch a fierce attack on the areas controlled by the Federal forces. The Federal forces also seemed to have gone crazy. They made a few command mistakes for no reason, causing a few large cities to be taken back by the Empire's troops one after another. This included the city he was in now. The Empire's cold black hibiscus flag mecha troops had already taken over every important place in this city. The Empire's army was continuously searching for these underground resistance organization members who should have died long ago. The people in the simple underground base quietened down, listening to the faint footsteps of the heavy mecha above their heads, the occasional gunshot, and the screams of women. The soldiers of the underground resistance organization had red eyes. They held the guns in their hands tightly and felt a dry and piercing pain in their throats. Muin frowned and looked at the backup underground escape tunnel. He did not say a word and did not give the order to retreat. Although the end of the underground tunnel looked dark and empty, he felt that there was some kind of great danger waiting for him there. "We have to go." A resistance organization officer moved closer to his ear with an anxious expression and whispered quickly, "The Army has the Black Dog of the Intelligence Department as a navigation system. They can find us at any time." What helped Muin to make up his mind was a loud thud from the sturdy alloy cover above his head. It was obvious that the Empire's Wolf Fong mecha broke through the concrete shield and used its heavy mechanical arm to smash the alloy cover. "Let's go." He shook his head, tightened his black fur coat, and led the most elite members of the underground resistance organization to quickly walk into the dark underground tunnel. However, at the end of the underground tunnel, a loud noise suddenly came. A huge explosion of unknown origin spewed out strong air waves and sharp fragments, knocking all 30 of them to the ground. Almost at the same time, the terrifying Empire's Wolf Fong mecha easily tore through the sturdy alloy cover and jumped into the underground space like a black and ugly grim reaper jumping out of the darkness. "Why don't you kill me? You're all experts. Save your energy." The Mafia boss, Muin, who was tightly tied to a pillar by a high-strength plastic rope, coughed violently as he stared indifferently at the officer of the Imperial Intelligence Bureau in front of him. In front of him were the corpses of more than a dozen resistance fighters. The slightly dark blood was about to solidify in this last underground base. "I heard that you just came back from the Federation. Just based on this, it is enough to execute you 10 times to atone for your crimes." The Empire's Intelligence Department officer coldly slapped his face. "But you can't die now, because we need you to go to the Federation again." Muin turned his neck with difficulty and looked at the Intelligence Department officer's side profile. He didn't understand what these black dogs wanted to do. At this moment, a thin man walked down from the temporarily built stairs. This person was wearing the military uniform of second lieutenant. His face was ordinary, and his messy short hair was covered with dust from the battlefield. It was such an ordinary-looking, low-level Empire officer, but he made the high-ranking officers of the Intelligence Department in the field shiver. It was as if even their breathing was about to stop. The thin young second lieutenant officer of the Empire quietly walked up to Muin. His pair of black, gem-like eyes naturally revealed coldness and strong confidence. He said, "I need you to take me to the Federation." Chapter 773. Muin stared at the skinny young Imperial officer through his blood-stained vision. From the man's dark eyes and the black hair under his military cap, He was sure that the man was a noble. He might even be a member of the royal family, but he did not know what his identity was. He forced himself to suppress the shock in his heart, coughed a few times, and said scornfully, "Although I don't know why a master like you insists on going to the Federation to die, do you think that I will really send you there just because you want me to?" Because of the glory of the Charter, it was impossible for the Empire to infiltrate the Federation with intelligence personnel. Similarly, because of the chip on the back of the Federation's neck, the citizens of the Federation could not enter the Empire's territory, except for Sulu. But now, because of the cooperation between the federal military and the Empire's underground resistance, there seemed to be some possibility of infiltration. Muin finally understood why so many of the Empire's elite troops would appear on this Immerse planet, and why the underground base of the organization would suffer from the enemy's relentless and terrifying attacks. All of this was because the Empire's royal family and military had keenly grasped that gap in the universe. Only by pretending to be a negotiation member of the underground resistance could this young noble officer enter the Federation. Muin did not even think about why the other party would take such a big risk and directly rejected the other party's request. This was related to the long-term cooperation between the Federation and the underground resistance, and related to the end of the bloody lives of the Empire's slaves. He did not care about any threats. "My name is Huai Chaoshi." The skinny imperial noble officer calmly looked at the blood-stained face of the underworld boss and said slowly with her hands behind her back, "Most people call me Su Ming. I rarely make requests to people, but as long as I do, no one will reject me." Hearing the other party's identity, Muin's pupils shrank, and he tilted his head in disbelief, trying to let the blood in his eyes out so that it would not blur his vision. He stared at the dazzling princess in front of him, and after a long silence, he said with a hoarse voice, "I refuse. I've said it before. No one can reject me, at least in the left heaven starfield." Huai Chaoshi narrowed his eyes and calmly sized up the prisoner. He suddenly said, "I don't want to use your mother, your wife, or your children to threaten you." This city was the most famous tourist destination on the Inkflower planet. The main colors of the city were yellow and rose red, and they looked particularly charming under the blue sky. Unfortunately, in the past few months, the fierce battle between the Empire and the Federal Army and the explosions of countless missiles had made the most beautiful bay buildings in the city look exceptionally desolate, with huge gaps appearing from time to time. Huai Chaoshi walked up the old-style limestone stone steps to the balcony of a building by the bay. She narrowed her eyes and looked at the white seabirds on the sea in the distance. She was calm and silent. In the building behind her, Muin was undergoing the most professional interrogation by the Empire's military intelligence. Further behind, in space, a high-speed battleship was approaching from the Tianjing planet. On it was Muin's family. Her silky black hair fluttered wildly in the sea breeze. She stuffed her hair into her military cap with her fingers, then took out a light brown lens and put it into her eyes. She thought to herself that she still needed to dye her hair before she left, but she didn't know what color she should dye her hair to make it look good. Would that important leader of the underground resistance agree to take her to the Federation? The proud and expressionless princess wasn't worried about this problem at all. She didn't think about those Muin's family members who were escorted over. Just based on the extremely professional methods of the old experts of the intelligence department, she believed that no one in the universe could withstand it. Oh, except for that small-eyed man. Huai Chaoshi's eyes narrowed even more. She looked at the white beach under the white balcony and was speechless. No matter how exaggerated it was, it could only be described as delicate and pretty, but there was actually a rare hint of worry and heaviness in her eyes. The seabird and the waves flew over, breaking through the waves and hiding behind the clouds. They landed nearby like ink dots, completely covering the white beach. Not a single grain of sand could be seen. Looking at this scene, she silently thought to herself, once you cross paths, it won't be easy to meet again. The terrorist attack on Parliament Hill, the bizarre assassination of the Federation's vice president, the continuous losses at the front lines, and the Federation's hero suddenly became a wanted criminal. Such stories played out one after another in the Capitol ring in the 72nd year of the constitutional calendar. It was like white clouds drifting over with cold faces and piling together to form an ink cloud that was about to break through the city. It made the citizens feel depressed, nervous, sad, and uneasy. Then someone had to come out and take responsibility. The political factions that lost in the election shouted like this. The families that didn't live too comfortably for the past 5 years pushed the puppets on the stage and shouted with cold eyes. The presidential candidates that were in the midst of an election that they were bound to lose shouted angrily at a gathering. All of the Federation citizens angrily banged their chopsticks and shouted at the white meat in their own cafeterias. Who's going to take responsibility? The Federation government or the wanted Colonel Sulu? Different people had different opinions in their hearts. If one had to make a vague definition, the older citizens who were more willing to believe in the government and loved the glory of the Federation from the bottom of their hearts insisted that Sulu, who had an association with the terrorist suspect and the traitor Yufeng, who had ignored the summons of the Federation government and insisted on fleeing, causing the entire Federation society to fall into a state of disintegration, should naturally take full responsibility. However, for the youths and students who were full of hot blood and dared to parade shirtless on the streets in the cold weather of Linhai, the Federation government's persecution of war heroes and fabricating a mess of crimes was obviously to cover up the conspiracy that Colonel Sulu hinted at in the press conference. Thus, they came up with another fucking disgusting conspiracy. If this filthy government didn't take responsibility, then who would take responsibility and who would step down? Fierce arguments occurred on online political forums, in tea houses and bars, and even in classrooms and families. Respected professors and indignant losers in the election for president of the Federation, a middle-aged manager who had just returned from work at the white meat factory, and his son who had just entered his first year of high school. Countless arguments erupted in every corner of the Federation society. Bad news of failure came from the front line again. More than half of the Mo Hua planet fell into the hands of the Empire. The federal forces seemed to be forced to give up the late spring offensive. The people in the arguments fell into silence. 2 days later, the 3 major Federation unions and the Veterans Association announced the launch of the largest strike in the history of the Federation. At this most dangerous time, they fully supported the Federation government and the frontline troops. Chapter 774. Since the beginning of the constitutional era, from the Republic to the Federation, whether it was the chairman or the president, their rule or management of the Three Woods Galaxy was actually a difficult time dancing with the Seven Wolves. The 7 families with terrifying power hid in the shadows after the end of the imperial rule. They coldly stared at the regime on the stage. Although the wolf's mouth was not like a blood basin, it spat out white fog in the cold winter season. Their sharp teeth were sometimes visible in the white fog. When they felt threatened or hungry, they would suddenly pounce and tear off a large piece of bloody flesh from the opponent's body. In the eyes of these families, the stories and incidents that happened around the 70th year of the 37th constitutional calendar were nothing more than a routine plot or a boring repetition of history. Even the death of the tiger, Silin, only made them join the government in coldly joining in the feast. It wasn't until the death of the military god, Li Bofu, that these families smelled something extremely dangerous from the explosion of the ancient bell. Then, through Su Li's escape, they realized that the current government seemed to be very different from the previous governments in terms of execution. Thus, they became vigilant. After becoming vigilant, the families began to use the media they controlled to launch public opinion attacks on the government and the man in the official residence through the so-called persecution of the Federation hero. Parliament Hill, which had been strongly influenced by them, also began to try to limit the expansion of the government's power or desire for power. But they did not expect that the Federation government and President Pabre, faced with this seemingly internal and external situation, did not panic. They were so calm that it was frightening. They did not use administrative means to fight back. They just waited calmly until a big event happened. It was a massive demonstration. A demonstration in support of the government that was rarely seen in the history of the Federation. In the huge industrial parks all over the Federation, there were billions of industrial workers who were members of the three major trade unions. The Veterans Association had the strong support of countless retired soldiers and the collective respect of the society. When such an influential civil organization suddenly launched a demonstration, one could imagine what kind of scene it would be. According to the demands of the three industrial unions, except for the enterprises involved in military supplies, all the workers in the industrial zones refused to go to work and took to the streets. Especially in the Federation's heavy industrial base S2, the strike rate had reached a terrifying 60%. The entire Federation's economy was seriously threatened. According to the post-event statistics, the strike and demonstration in the early autumn of the 72nd year of the constitutional calendar was the largest in history, and it led to the most disastrous losses for enterprises. The momentum was so great that it was unprecedented. Every corner of the society was shaken and even trembled because of it. Countless ordinary citizens of the Federation walked onto the streets. People were holding simple, self-made slogans and shouting slogans loudly in grief and indignation, inciting the bystanders on the streets to dance and join the crowd. In front of the strikers that broke out in the various states of the Federation, there were batches of disabled soldiers in wheelchairs or on crutches. With solemn expressions and military medals on their chests, they were marching toward their respective destinations, the square or the city hall. In the face of these heroic veterans, the government's riot police didn't dare to do anything. In fact, it was a request of the president's office that all government agencies were not allowed to do anything to stop the strike. As the strike deepened, as well as the loud and powerful slogans, such as who should be responsible for the victory of the war on the front lines, the battle of public opinion that had puzzled the Federation's citizens for a long time suddenly changed. The power gathered by the will of the people was so terrifying that it could affect the media's reporting and even the rational judgment of many people around them. Not many people still believed that the Federation was persecuting Colonel Sulu. Even the young students who were shouting themselves hoarse for Sulu just last week joined the strikers who were crying for the government and calling for unity in the Federation. Perhaps this seemed a bit absurd, but in fact, it was just a kind of tragedy. The ordinary people who lacked enough real information for reference would always easily stand on the side that seemed reasonable in their analysis and judgment of the situation. Whether it was reasonable or not, in fact, it depended on whose voice was louder. This wasn't a political swing like a fence-sitter, but the natural choice of the frustrated social animals. The great families who had just woken up and were preparing to control, or at least check and balance the Federation's government, and President Pabre were forced to remain silent at this moment. The media they controlled couldn't directly confront the ocean of angry people. The giant enterprises they controlled that could affect the Federation's survival couldn't ignore this terrifying strike and choose to confront the government because they were the seven great families. However, they were the seven great families of the Federation. They couldn't watch the Federation walk to the edge of collapse because if that happened, they wouldn't have a corpse left. A few years ago, Medellin, who was investigated by the Federation government, had remotely controlled those fanatical young George Carlin activists in the Ministry of Justice to raise a demonstration that shook the Federation, thus forcing the government and the seven great families to choose to compromise. At the time, Mr. Pabre, who was his competitor, had always maintained his silence. Now, this great strike that was far more powerful than the new year finally made the seven great families and the people in the Federation's political circle realize just what kind of lofty prestige President Pabre had among the people at the bottom of the Federation's hierarchy. In the past few decades, Pabre had worked tirelessly to fight public interest cases for the ordinary workers. It was very rare that he was the chief lawyer of the three great industrial unions and the Veteran Association. He was deeply loved and respected. This experience had undoubtedly played a great role in today's public tide that affected several star regions. From this perspective, when Medellin raised the Federation's unrest, Pabre's silence was actually just a kind of condescending calmness and confidence. Looking back at the past and looking at the crowds of people on the streets today, this kind of calmness and confidence was terrifying. The Federation's Great Strike went on for the second day. Hundreds of thousands of marching troops marched from the industrial park in the southern suburbs of the capital to the capital's special district on foot. The mighty demonstration troops completely paralyzed the ground transportation in the capital special district, and the big shots who felt the threat of this fanatical crowd took the air transportation in advance and left their respective residences. At noon that day, President Pabre gave a speech in front of the president's official residence. The fanatical and chaotic demonstrators crowded the entire Charter Square. When they heard the president's hoarse and tired voice that was still full of upward spirit, everyone quieted down. This was truly an incredible scene. The appeal of human beings who had a common goal oscillated and amplified each other, gradually turning into a kind of control that had a religious and sacred feeling. This kind of control could not be seen at all. It was silent and invisible, and it was only exchanged in people's eyes and gestures. In the speech, President Pabre told the demonstrators the root cause of the military failure in the front line, severely criticized the selfish manipulation of a certain financial association and its affiliated media organizations, and asked the parliament to pass several important wartime regulations. At the same time, he called on the people who participated in the demonstration in the Federation to try their best to stay calm and return to their posts as soon as possible, because the Federation in war needs your passion and desire for justice. But it also needs your labor and wisdom to win a comprehensive victory against the empire. What kind of humiliation was this kind of call to take the overall situation into consideration? The dense and silent crowd in Charter Square suddenly erupted into a huge wave of applause and cheers. The young female students were so excited that tears were streaming down their faces. The middle-aged workers were so excited that their faces turned red, and the disabled veterans in wheelchairs at the front of the line touched the military medal on their left chest with their right hand and looked at the president on the stage with a determined expression, vowing to fight for the glory of the Federation until the last drop of blood was shed. The president called on the people who participated in the strike to return to their posts. However, the people who deeply understood the difficult situation of the government from his speech swarmed to the Parliament Hill before the end of the strike. They shouted angrily, waved the photocopied votes in their hands, and asked the Parliament members who were urgently convening the Parliament to immediately pass several important bills submitted by the government. Naturally, Parliament Hill would not back down just like that. After all, although the temporary wartime regulations did not significantly relax the authority of the government, two of the regulations related to the audit of funds were directly related to how deeply those few large families could hide in the shadows of history. The angry demonstrators calmly did not rush to the cordon under the long stone stairs, but they surrounded the magnificent building and threw countless artificial eggs and squid on the stone stairs, adding countless stains to the building that had just finished its outer wall. Wearing a single windbreaker, Bob walked on the street with a gloomy face. The reflection of the fire on the corner of the street was reflected in his eyes. An overturned police car was burning, and it seemed to have ignited the thick cigarette that he had forgotten to light at the corner of his mouth. The streets of the Capital Special District were full of garbage and waste. The cleaning workers' strike would continue until the next morning, which meant that the city, swept by the demonstration, would still look like a garbage dump until the next morning. Relying on the efficient organization of the three industrial unions and the Veterans Association, the strong guidance of the police department, and the continuous appeals of the government and President Pabre, the fanatical demonstrators did not lose control. The Capital Special District was very lucky to be safe. However, there were always some unexpected situations, such as the overturned police car that was burning and the luxury store that was smashed into ruins in a more remote corner. The situation is not dangerous, but the trend is too dangerous. At the corner of the street, Bob lowered his head and lit the thick cigarette in the hand of Wood, who came to pick him up. He looked around cautiously and said in a low voice, "Using the power of the people to fight against the power of the powerful class. Once it gets out of control, there will be big problems." Wood smiled and said, "But I quite like to see those old men panic. The Federation is not an empire. Of course, there is unfairness, but I insist that there is no such thing as an old man." After a pause, Bob frowned and said, "The official residents rejected my application. It seems that Mr. President is not willing to talk to our disobedient newspaper." Chapter 775. At a time like this, you can't expect Mr. President to have enough patience to listen to the nagging of a chief editor. Wood paused, lit the slender cigarette between his fingers, shook his head, and said, "Even the Post and several other newspapers with a clear background have now withdrawn their tentacles under the pressure of the public. The voices we can make, or the power these voices can convey, may not be enough for the government to show enough respect." Maybe so. Chief Editor Bob fastened the collar of his windbreaker and walked side by side with Wood to the newspaper office. However, just as they turned the corner and were still a few hundred meters away from the newspaper office, they were forced to stop. "Gentlemen, please don't go there." Dark yellow police lines blocked both ends of the street. Dozens of policemen anxiously shouted and blocked the crowd. Fortunately, today's demonstration had dispersed. Otherwise, with just these people and a few thin yellow police lines, it was absolutely impossible to maintain order at the scene. Chief Editor Bob looked at the burning newspaper office building hundreds of meters away. His pupils shrank sharply, and the thick cigarette in his mouth fell to the ground with a bang, making a few sparks. Wood opened his mouth in shock, stared at the building where he usually worked, stared at the terrible flames floating out of the windows, and trembled with anger. He pushed the policeman in front of him and roared, "Let us go. There are still people in the newspaper office." "Mr. Reporter, the staff in the newspaper office building have been safely evacuated." The policeman who maintained order guessed the identity of the two middle-aged men, and his attitude was slightly gentler. He explained, "Except for a few slightly burned staff members who are under observation in the 4th Hospital, no one was injured." Hearing that his colleagues in the newspaper office were safe, Wood's shock and worry eased a lot, and his angry movements subconsciously stopped. He stared at the newspaper office building in the distance, which was burning miserably like a giant torch, and subconsciously grabbed his hair in pain and murmured in a trembling voice, "What the hell is going on? What the hell is going on?" Chief Editor Bob looked at the building where he had been working since he graduated from journalism school. He pursed his lips tightly and did not say a word. The building was burning, turning into a charred ruin. The fierce fire seemed to be burning away the passion of his youth, the persistence of his middle age, and his original view of the world. This kind of burning in the depths of his heart should be an extremely painful thing, but there was not much expression on his face. Gradually, even the anger disappeared, and there was only calmness and even indifference. Bob still felt that he couldn't see clearly enough. He couldn't see clearly enough. He couldn't see the scene of the death of something precious in his heart. He slowly took out a pair of glasses from the inside pocket of his windbreaker and put them on. A big fire can burn everything, including the secret database that we are so proud of. Red, yellow, and black flames were reflected on the spectacles. Bob's cold eyes penetrated the spectacles and looked at the burning building. He suddenly said faintly. Wood's body suddenly stiffened as he stared at the side of his face in disbelief. If this fire was not an accident, then who dared to burn the most credible news agency of the Federation into ruins? Was it really the government? Medellin is dead, and Pabre won the election. I thought the world had changed a lot. Mr. Reporter, who was known for his fearless spirit and his ability to entertain the paparazzi, remembered the Medellin case investigation that had won him the Nebula Award for Best Documentary Reporting. He painfully frowned and looked at the building that was getting bigger and bigger. He said in a hoarse and angry voice, "In the end, nothing has changed. Could it be that those people want to break my leg again? Or are they going to kill us? The fire is an action and a warning. Although it is difficult to kill two famous reporters of the Federation and then disguise it as an accident, I believe that if we continue, such a tragic ending will definitely be waiting for us not far away. Chief Editor Bob said expressionlessly. Then he lowered his head and looked at the thick tobacco that was struggling to survive in the autumn wind. He said, "I am very disappointed with all of this." Wood's eyes became sharp and hot. He stared at the flames that were spreading outside the building in the distance. He looked at the busy police in front of him and the fire ladder truck that was obviously late. He lowered his voice and said fiercely, "I want to go in and grab that information. The memory is not necessarily damaged by the fire." Before the fire, all of the memory must have been destroyed. Bob stopped his companion's courageous and adventurous, but obviously stupid and impulsive idea. He said calmly, "But fortunately, I have made a backup in advance." Wood was stunned. He patted the chief editor's shoulder that was not very strong. He smiled awkwardly, but did not laugh out loud. He said in a hoarse voice, "Good job. What should we do next?" "The most important problem we face is what to do about tomorrow's newspaper." Bob rubbed his painful shoulder and said calmly, "I will go to the hospital and the police station at this time. You go and contact the experts in the industry. Rent a few workstations first and work overtime tonight. The fiber paper edition will be suspended for 5 days, but the electronic edition must be released on time." "Understood," Wood replied very quickly. Then he frowned and asked in a low voice, "Start the report tomorrow?" "I have already written a part of it. The title is also chosen. It will be called Forever Antique Bell." Too lyrical, but I like it. Chief Editor Bob's tone was particularly serious. He ordered seriously, "But we can't publish it now. Facing such a powerful president and government, I believe that before this report is published, you and I may be robbed and stabbed to death by a street gangster at any time, or be hit by a speeding car again." "I understand. We need to wait for the right time." "That's it." The two of them looked at the burning newspaper building in the distance with a complicated expression across the yellow police line. Then they prepared to leave. At this time, a large piece of heavy object suddenly fell from the edge of the burning newspaper building. It made an extremely loud, muffled sound. Countless sparks and charred pieces of metal splashed everywhere, causing the firefighters on the street to run for cover. The long period of high temperature caused the piece of metal to lose its original appearance, but Bob and Wood knew very well what it was. It was the famous logo of the Capital Special District Daily, a half-eclipsed moon. The moon eclipse. The moon eclipse was not one of the two beautiful moons in the night sky of S1. It was the forgotten asteroid in the sky of Eastwood. Back then, in order to develop the crystal mine resources on Eastwood Planet, the First Republic Federation hid from the management committee occupied by extreme environmentalists and forcibly ordered the 4th Military Region to use prohibited weapons to blow up the asteroid, changing its orbit and leaving behind an extremely ugly moon eclipse that was riddled with scars. There is no need to argue about who was right or wrong in history. For the reporters of the Capital Special District Daily News, the image of the eclipse of the moon reminded them of the famous words uttered by their predecessors when they broke through the government's news blackout at all costs. "Half of the moon has been eclipsed. We need to find out the reason." Chief Editor Bob and Wood looked at the charred moon eclipse image in silence. Their expressions were complicated, and their hearts were heavy. Although it was early autumn, a building was burning not far away. The entire street was occupied by the hot and dry air, but they felt a little cold. Sulu, wearing a hat, stood in the crowd on the street. At this moment, he, like the people around him, seemed to be grabbed by the neck by an invisible hand. He stood on his tiptoes and looked into the distance. This scene looked very interesting. It was like those rich people who could get documents from HTED to raise cats, grabbing the soft skin behind the cat's neck. The crowd was like many cats who did not know what their owners were thinking. They stared curiously at the burning building, guessing what had happened. Did it have anything to do with the rally in the morning? Did anyone die? How many people died? Will there be a memorial service tomorrow? There were all kinds of questions. The indifferent sadness made people feel that it was not so sincere. Sulu left quietly, lit a dry cigarette in the autumn wind, and walked with his head down through the city that was getting darker and darker. He did not think that there was any difference between him and the crowd, but he seemed to be able to vaguely understand what the real masters of the Federation were thinking. At least he knew that those people wanted to kill him. These days, he, who had been traveling in the underground world and on the surface, was facing the almost omnipresent pursuit of the Federation government. At the south gate of the Botanical Garden and outside the walls of the 33 protein meat synthesis factory, he had been attacked several times in a row. The situation was extremely dangerous. Although the old man still stood on his side in a reserved and uneasy manner, in the face of the Federation government, which had a secondary surveillance network and countless resources, he, who was only one person, was still too weak in the end. Especially recently, the intensity and precision of the government's pursuit made him sensitive enough to smell a trace of danger. Behind the surveillance cameras on the streets and alleys, there seemed to be a group of very powerful people hidden, and they were trying their best to hunt him down. These people were very professional, but they did not have the bureaucratic inefficiency that was unique to the Federation Investigation Bureau. These people were very professional, but they were not as easy to be careless as the army. Their calculation methods were very meticulous and very targeted. Yes, targeted. The continuous attacks and the sense of crisis that was getting closer and closer to death made Sulu feel that these people understood him very well, and sometimes even more accurately than he did in grasping his combat style and choice of action. In addition to speculating with interest about the composition of the team, he often thought about President Pabre's conversation in the official residence when he was underground these days. However, today, when he saw the newspaper building burned to a crisp, he realized that he had made a mistake. If you're not good at thinking, then don't think. If you're used to doing more and saying less, then don't think too much and do too little. Since many people praised him for being good at simplifying complicated things, then after returning from the West Woods, he should not choose the opposite behavior pattern. In the end, people should still walk the path they are familiar with. For Sulu, who was walking on the streets of the capital, what he should do, and what he would do, was to raise the gun in his hand and defend his principles. Chapter 776. I heard that 2 police officers were killed in today's parade. That has nothing to do with us. I heard that the Capitol Daily building was burnt to a crisp because a plate maker was smoking in the underground workshop. That still has nothing to do with us. The official flipped the badge between his fingers and very rudely refused Biderman's attempt to chat. Although the young former technical genius of the Bureau of Proclamation played a very important role in the team, the official couldn't help but feel disgusted by the habits of these so-called geniuses whenever he thought that the combat genius was looking at him indifferently in the underground tunnel. The pattern on the badge was a squinting eye. This small troop, specially established by the government, was gradually perfecting its structure with special uniforms and equipment. The cooperation between the members was getting better and better, and their work was getting smoother and smoother. They were getting closer and closer to their ultimate goal. But what frustrated everyone in the Small Eyes troop was that although they were infinitely close to the goal and had even lured the enemy out of the underground tunnel and trapped him under the wall, the enemy still managed to escape in the end. It seemed that the target was right in front of them, but they didn't know where his real body was hidden in the city. Don't be too frustrated, and don't be too nervous. Smoking a cigarette, Biderman looked at his colleagues in the room and laughed exaggeratedly. He waved his hand and said, "This independent area has been specially set up by me. Together with those back doors, the Federal Central Computer doesn't know what we are doing at all. Then, that Colonel Su Lun naturally doesn't know either." The official ignored him and waved his hand to summon all the members of the Small Eyes troop around the wide hologram table. His fingers quickly flipped through the electronic pattern and said in a deep voice, "For the next plan, the Strategic Research Division of the Investigation Bureau has given some new suggestions." What suggestions? The tone of the question was very calm. The members of the Small Eyes troop in this building, who came from various powerful agencies of the Federation government, seemed to have a certain trait in common: the indifference and lethargy unique to technical personnel. The psychology professor took over the topic of the official and pointed at the picture on the table. This is the archive of the investigation of the Federation Investigation Bureau a few years ago. It is a high-resolution satellite image of the traces left by Colonel Sulu after he smoked and thought in Charter Square before he made up his mind to assassinate Senator Medellin. From the arrangement of these cigarette butts, we can confirm that he is a very orderly person. Biderman continued his sarcastic remarks. Looking at the picture of the plum blossom-shaped cigarette butts in the snow, he said sarcastically, "Perhaps this only shows that our Federation hero is an artistic youth at heart." Like all his colleagues, the professor of psychology had long learned to automatically filter the voice of this young technical genius. He continued, "According to the peripheral interview, Colonel Sulu has a small habit after smoking, and that is he will carefully crush the cigarette, but only stop when he is sure that there is no spark. Also, except for the mental struggle between the battlefield and the last time he tried to assassinate Senator Macklin, he will throw every cigarette but into the non-recyclable bin." Biderman said in a slightly shrill voice, "What can this prove? Is he a person who keeps order and is extremely cautious? Think about it with your pig brain. Is a colonel of the Federation full of masculine hormones who assassinated a senator with outstanding military exploits the kind of person you think he is? In the past, I've always thought that you have a very outstanding strength, and that is that you can always be exceptionally calm and cautious in all kinds of battles. So, I really did not expect that you would be crazy enough to choose this place to meet me." Zoe did not draw her eyebrows today, but her eyebrows were still as beautiful as a painting. She slowly cut the premium steak in front of her, her eyes slightly lowered, but it seemed that she was carefully observing the friend across the table who she had not seen for a long time. However, she did not have much appetite. Her red fingers, which were painted with cardamom, put down the silver knife and fork and held the glass of red wine by the thin glass neck. She raised the glass and drank the wine in one gulp, frowning somewhat painfully. "A very important elder to me once said some last words to me before he died. Although he seems to be alive and well now, I have never forgotten these last words." Sulu chewed the really delicious and juicy beef in big mouthfuls. He lowered his head and replied vaguely. He said that the most dangerous place is the safest place, but it is best not to try it more than 3 times. I have been on the run for so many years, and I have never practiced this teaching, but you know the recent situation. If I don't try this method now, I may never have the chance to try it again. Zoe looked at him quietly, without showing any concern or worry, because concern and worry did not need to be expressed with eyebrows. She dabbed the corner of her mouth with an exquisite napkin with the 3 ancient letters LFB written on it, and said, "So you chose to meet here. Mr. President and the government must be the most vigilant now that I have joined hands with those big families. This is the Lufeng Slope Club, which is close to the Charter Square and the official residence. Naturally, it is the most dangerous place." Sulu finished the steak in front of him and drank half a glass of water with satisfaction. He looked coldly at the people in the room and said, "We have to anger him and force him into the mental environment that he had before he assassinated Senator Macklin. Only then can we set up a perfect trap and kill him." According to the confidential information we have, the spy from Green Dragon Mountain that Colonel Sulu tried to avenge was actually killed by both the government and Green Dragon Mountain. And we believe that Colonel Sulu himself has also found out this. The official pointed to the old man in the image and said, "His name is Jean Shioda, the second most important person in the Central Committee of Green Dragon Mountain. Since the death of that legendary figure, he's been the nominal leader of the intelligence system of the anti-government army. In a few days, this person will visit the capital special district. If Sulu wants to kill this person, this is the best opportunity, and this will also be our best opportunity." Biderman raised his hand to raise an objection. He said, "If I remember correctly, Colonel Sulu has been hiding in the underground water for many days and has not taken any action. If he can still hold back this time, what will you do?" How will you anger him? We still have the second bait. The official pulled up another image and pointed to the colonel wearing the windbreaker of the 4th Military Region. He said, his name is Colonel Lake, and he was arrested for the Ancient Bell incident. The Federation military court will acquit him later. The official raised his head and looked at the people in the room. He said in a cold voice, when Colonel Lake walks out of the court, Sulu will definitely try to kill him. Do you understand? If Biderman still wanted to argue. In his opinion, no matter how powerful a person was, facing the pursuit of the entire Federation, it was impossible for him to expose his whereabouts for these so-called baits, because it was obviously courting death. The official directly interrupted his question and said, if he can control his anger like this, then he is not the Colonel Su Lu that we desperately want to kill. Lu Feng's Slope Club. Zoe looked at the small half-cup of water in Su Li's hand and frowned slightly. She said, the military court is about to start the trial of Colonel Lake's rebellion. I think you should be mentally prepared for the result. Yes. Su Lu drank the remaining water in the cup and said, if the court acquits him, then I will kill him before he walks out of the court. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.